Hey there, and welcome to That Bond Show, a That Nerdy Site show and the internet's number one James Bond rewatch show hosted by two guys named Logan and Trevor. Probably. Join us as each week we dive through a new James Bond movie from Dr. No to No Time to Die. I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson, and joining me, as always, is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Starkey. Trevor Starkey.
What a great way to bring it full circle here. This is the series finale of That Bond Show, episode 26 of this limited run series over at That Nerdy Site. We have journeyed through all 25 James Bond movies over 26 weeks, 6 months. Trevor, we did it. We're here. We're at the finish line now.
Yep. Made it through. I survived.
Yeah, made it. You survived. You thrived through some of these episodes here. I think, I wanted to do this episode. I had the idea for this episode in mind pretty early on, both as kind of a wrap-up and a capstone to 25 episodes and films of the James Bond series, to kind of look back on everything, reflect over our favorite moments, least favorite moments maybe, and also take a look ahead to kind of the future of the Bond series as well. But I thought I'd start off with a very simple question. Trevor, you've seen the James Bond saga in its entirety now. What do you think of the James Bond series, right? We'll start small.
Start with something small like that.
Yeah. We're going to bring us back at the end of the episode, too, so you have to go too deep yet.
Yeah. I am definitely not... this did not win me over.
That's a totally acceptable answer.
Yeah. I liked the ones that I had already probably seen enough. And I'll say the Timothy Dalton era was a fun surprise, a delight. But those first 15 movies were real rough. There was a lot of real bad weeks there early on. I'm like, oh, this stuff just does not hold up. And trying to watch this at age 36, 37 is not nearly as enthralling as I imagined it could be if you're watching this for the first time as a 7-year-old or something like that. Right. So yeah, I was just constantly struggling early on, and then when we got to the modern stuff, it became a lot more manageable, tenable, and just more in my wheelhouse, especially as I'm not somebody typically who goes out of my way to go back and watch old cinema or something like that. It's the handful of movies that that I've watched that predate me are your Star Wars, Princess Bride, a couple of things like that. And even the Back to the Future saga is basically right when I was born-ish. So yeah, I just don't typically go back to a lot of old stuff, and I think as a result I don't necessarily have a drive or desire to see a lot of the older filmmaking techniques and stuff. I think there have been significant improvements, and I think there's a lot of a lot of my tastes are very much influenced by the cinema of the 80s and beyond, more so than anything prior to that.
I think it's really interesting that you chose, Back to the Future or Star Wars as well, right? Because Star Wars being the oldest thing that you'd go back to and rewatch, go check out some more Star Wars last year, is a good example of I would argue Star Wars is very much not classic Hollywood cinema, right? It is very much new Hollywood, kind of a reaction to that kind of classic golden age thing. So even the oldest thing you would watch isn't a classic cinema kind of era anymore, right? It's already something different, right? So that's a really, I think, interesting point to kind of point out something of even your oldest films are already not kind of the golden age of Hollywood kind of era film.
Yeah, no, and I'm definitely not trying to I was not saying I don't go back and watch golden age of cinema.
I think it's a really really interesting point. Yeah,
I'm just saying the oldest movies I've watched are
already
late 70s.
Yeah,
and that more in the context of we joked a few weeks ago or something about the idea of doing a Rocky in review or something like that. I've not watched most of the Rocky movies. I've never watched the Godfather movies. I just don't.
Godfather's great.
The big prior to like an era of blockbusters, I've just
Right.
never really
Yeah.
gone back and sought those out. And
You
so
beat me
yeah,
to my point, right? Yeah, like the right that yeah that new Hollywood era of like Spielberg and Lucas and Coppola and like Robert Altman a little bit like that changed how movies were made in like a way that is still felt to this day, right? And so yeah, you go back to 1962 and Terrence Young, right, directing Doctor No, it feels more than the 10, 15 years away it is from episode 4, because it's been a quantum leap in terms of how films are made and how they're shot and how their like stories are told, kind of thing, how acting is done. Right. Whereas 1962 Doctor No feels much more in line with a movie from like the 50s or 40s, probably, right? Because that kind of still like golden age hue to it. For me, yeah, like it's interesting. I still really loved these movies. For the most part, right? Like I always enjoy doing rewatches of James Bond or Star Wars or whatever film series it is that I have an affinity for, Back to the Future even, which is I think a great shared love of ours, because it's always fun to see how your thoughts and feelings and opinions on things change over time as you get older, right? And you kind of gain distance from things. And that's one of my favorite parts of doing ranking and kind of rewatch lists. Is I'm someone who loves ranking shit. I'm someone who loves watching shit. Perfect meld into both those worlds. Yeah, and so this is my first real rewatch of like all the movies since probably 2012 and Skyfall. It's been the longest I've had in between doing them. And yeah, it was really interesting to see the differences in how I view all of the movies kind of watched all together from when I was 20 to now when I'm 30 years old, right? And so that's been one of the things I really enjoyed about it. But we're just going to keep going through the motions here, Trevor. One of the things I thought would be fun to do would kind of run through some of the biggest surprises, either in terms of things we liked that we didn't think we would like, things we didn't like that we thought we might, or just things that we were surprised by, right? And I think for me, one of my favorite things is actually about you, which is really surprised, maybe is a bit strong, but like really happy with how much you dug the Timothy Dalton Bond films, right? Because I had said going into it that was maybe the biggest wild card. It's like Roger Moore you might like, right? That's one that's some people have a big affinity for him, but I would say the majority probably think he's one of the weaker Bonds. But Timothy Dalton is one where like people have him ranked as high as like that is their favorite Bond, or as low as that is their least favorite Bond, right? He's very much like it's all over the map kind of thing. And so I really enjoyed seeing how much you like immediately identified like, oh, this is just a proto Daniel Craig who just didn't get the love he deserved at the time kind of thing, and like immediately latched onto him.
Yeah, that's. I mean, we talked about that a lot, kind of at the time with those movies of, like, it's fascinating for me because I was going into it with the context of I really like Timothy Dalton from his guest stint on Chuck or from Hot Fuzz or from Doctor Who. Like, I liked what I had seen of Timothy Dalton before seeing Timothy Dalton as Bond, and especially like Chuck was one that in particular, like, I was so into that show that I would do a lot of like additional kind of research and dig into like the guest stars that they would bring on, because they always picked guest stars because of their nerd cred effectively. Or that they would cast against type deliberately or something like that, like Brandon Roth going from playing Superman in the films to playing a secret agent who ends up being a bad guy in Chuck, was a delightful thing. Or Scott Bakula, who like I grew up watching in Quantum Leap with my dad, or Star Trek Enterprise or something like that, going in and doing Chuck. So Timothy Dalton kind of coming in and also playing a little against type, because he's playing big bad Russian kind of like bad guy in that series, was like a lot of fun. And then so seeing him in this and not really knowing what to expect, it was a mix of, I already really liked him going into this, and I think even more so, I really, really hated all of the Roger Moore stuff.
Yeah.
So I was like, a lot of my affinity and love of the Timothy Dalton movies is built very much on the foundation of, I'm so fucking glad that I never have to think of a Roger Moore movie again. And then like it was just also beneficial then that that those movies had a distinct feel in a jump to now we're making 80s movies. And yeah, as you kind of touched on, like it is a much darker, grittier Bond, just ahead of his time in terms of what that audience was looking for or used to for the last 30 years at that point. Or 20 years. So yeah, it was like that was certainly a big surprise for me too, because it was also like the last unknown, really, I guess, for me as well, was like obviously we talked about a lot early on of my Bond growing up was Pierce Brosnan and then obviously Daniel Craig, and I'd never really gone back and watched any of the stuff prior to that. So the Connery era, the Lazenby one, and then more, all of that was new, as was Timothy Dalton, and Timothy Dalton was very much like the couple of Daniel Craig movies that I hadn't seen. It was like, this is the last unknown. At least the Daniel Craig ones, I was around and following film enough when they came out that I had like a general vibe of what those were going to be about, what they were going to be like, how I was going to like receive them. But like the Dalton era stuff was just pure unknown. Like I didn't have going into that first one, I was like, I was not expecting, full 80s movie, or especially in License to Kill.
License to Kill in particular.
You get the just full 80s cocaine, like drug lord kind of as your baddie.
It's just a straight up Roadhouse scene.
Straight up Roadhouse, Miami Vice left and right. Plus a very young Benicio del Toro. Like that one was just full of like fun surprises in addition to just being like also a fun, gritty, dark Bond, which again, after 15 movies of Connery, Lazenby, and more, like that was very much what I needed.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting too, because I think the first 7 to 8 Bond movies, like really for most of the Sean Connery era, through all the way through Live and Let Die, I would say I think you were mostly like, these are some of these movies I enjoy less than others. Thunderball, right? But you were like, From Russia with Love is good. Goldfinger I really like, kind of thing, right? Diamonds Are Forever was fun to like kind of watch together, kind of thing. I don't think you were having like a bad time outside of, again, maybe Thunderball. And then it was just like everything after that, I think with the exception of Spy Who Loved Me, was just so much in the opposite direction that like it just increased and began to just cloud out everything else and any other good memories. And so it was fun too, because I had said before we got to it that like especially Living Daylights, because I watch License to Kill more, but like Living Daylights is one that like I just don't typically watch that much, right? I go into this series, I had been like, Timothy Dalton is like a good Bond, but he's not like my favorite by any means. And his movies kind of fall in that same vein. And I really loved Living Daylights. Like I think that movie's like incredible. And I think there's been no bigger shift from a Bond movie from one to the other than A View to a Kill to Living Daylights, right? Like some people might say Die Another Day and Casino Royale, but like at least they're like both the Bonds are still doing great, still look like they can be James Bond, are still giving it their all, kind of thing. Roger Moore is so clearly checked out in View to a Kill. Like that movie is fun because it's got Christopher Walken's in it and it's got Grace Jones in it, and everything that's around them is bad. And the fact that you can have fun with it is just such a like example of how good those two are and how weird they are in that movie. But like, yeah, Roger Moore's like 60 almost, is just like whatever, got like weird work done in his face. He looks strange now. Like there's just so much weirdness to it. It's very campy. And then like Living Daylights is like actually like an espionage thriller, especially in like the first half of that movie, and it's rad and it's cool, and it is such a jarring shift from Roger Moore at the end of his run to Timothy Dalton at the beginning.
Yeah, especially those. Yeah, I will always remember that turning point of like, maybe I like the Moore era better than the Connery era, and then fell straight off a cliff after that.
Right, the very next movie. You never.
And it did not turn around until Dalton. But like even Grace Jones, like I did not like Grace Jones at all.
Grace Jones, I don't think she's good in that movie. I think she's weird, and it's like I can't help but look away
Oh,
from
it's a fat. It's car cretch watching.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
100%.
like and if it wasn't Christopher Walken, if that was anybody else,
Oh
that
yeah,
also would not have been like as
it'd have been
enjoyable.
fine.
So
Yeah.
much of that is like, oh, it's Christopher Walken and he's a weird guy, so I'm
Mhm.
enjoying like that element
Doing
of
him
it. But
doing
yeah,
weird
so much
shit.
of
Yeah.
that movie was just like also
What is
just
happening?
weird. I mean, to the earlier, yeah, like obviously, like it really took a nosedive in those late more stuff. But I will say, like even the earlier ones, I what like I didn't hate maybe, but like nothing prior to that, nothing prior to Dalton really is stuff I would ever feel the need or the urge to go back and rewatch.
Hmm.
Even the two highlights of those eras of Goldfinger with Connery and Spy Who Loved Me with More, like neither of those are anything I'm ever going to be compelled to go back and watch. I just have zero interest in revisiting those. And like a lot, like especially with Goldfinger, like a lot of the big like things I liked about Goldfinger, I already knew because
Right.
like I'm a
Their
student.
pop culture,
I'm a
like
student of pop culture.
iconography.
Yeah, I
Right. Yeah.
knew those elements. I knew those things. I mean, I like you and I were talking a lot about cartoons and stuff before we started recording. I would put the Hank Scorpio episode up against anything from the Moore and Connery era as just better. And admittedly, it's because it was one of those early deconstructions of James Bond as a character and
Mm.
the villains as villains kind of thing. But yeah, there's also this undercurrent that we talked about especially a lot during the Connery era of like me living and my first introduction to a lot of this stuff being Austin Powers.
Austin Powers
Definitely skews my perspective on any of this stuff.
Right.
In a way that I'm just like, yeah, a lot of the stuff just isn't good because I grew up watching
with the
comedians.
deconstruction, right?
I grew up
and
watching comedians take the piss out of these characters already, and it like not even just Austin Powers, but like the like the parody of Bond has been a thing my entire life. Like
Darkwing Duck,
you know,
is
like
doing James Bond, right?
Darkwing Duck. I mean, like Muppets and Muppet Babies and stuff like that. I remember probably like the like Frog Kermit the or something like that. Like I'm sure like it was in every single cartoon I had growing up where these characters, if they were doing it, or like we talked about it recently when we did that D Plus show on the Chip and Dale movie, which I know you just recently watched. Like they have the like Double O Dale like spin-off that he's trying to do, and they did an episode of the original show that was like Double O Chipmunk or something like that, and it was basically Dale falling in love with a TV spy that was basically just a James Bond character, and he goes and does like a James Bond parody. So like I've grown up with the character of Bond being much more broad and lampooned and just like referenced and parodied in everything. So it's impossible to watch the original Connery without having all of those things kind of like ruined in a way. And then also, yeah, I think just again, going back to like my lack of interest in how older films were made and stuff. There was just a lot of like pain points in like, you love the train fight in From Russia with Love, and I'm like, this is not a good fight. Like I've choreographed better fights than that in stage combat classes in college and stuff, and it was just clumsy looking, and like I get that just wasn't a thing they were worried about at the time. So yeah,
I think that one of the things I really like about James Bond is the fact that it is this really kind of singular pop culture entity that existed for so many generations, right? So yeah, like it is certainly for the first like 20 years it existed was really the only thing that people could pull from and make fun of, right? Until like Star Wars started becoming a thing. And so yeah, like cartoons and TV shows have just been mimicking and parodying this thing since at least the 80s, if not before, like things you which didn't watch that, obviously before that, but like every cartoon I've ever watched has had some sort of episode where it's had like a spy theme and someone is doing some like impersonation of James Bond, right? Or like every show I've ever seen has had somebody at some point in time say their last name first, right? Kind of thing. Or, have a suave thing, or shaken, not stirred, or these kind of lines. And so I think that's part of the fun of James Bond, is that like it is one of the few pop culture franchises that is just endlessly parodiable and endlessly lampooned and endlessly done. And I also think it is also a testament to just how good of movies I think the first two Austin Power films are, and just how like much of both like a love letter they are by Mike Myers, as someone who very genuinely loves these movies and does love Sean Connery. Again, he's got a great AFI speech where he kind of talks about how like his dad looked up to Sean Connery and he looked up to his dad. And like how smart they were. And to your point you made, 20 weeks ago, whatever, like how many of the jokes are just subtle variations on shit that actually just happened. And like isn't even like that far of a reach from where they were actually at.
Yeah, a judo chop is just a move he straight up does in that first Dr. No movie.
Seagull on the head kind of shit. Like there were just like scenes which is like, yeah, it's just a thing in the movie, and it's great. And obviously down to just like number 2, right, and like that kind of thing, like the ranking of people, like it is, or him having an eye patch kind of thing. They should have made that character, and yeah, I think that is some of the fun of James Bond, is also finding the great kind of, parodies and lampoons of it as well. Trevor, did you have any biggest surprises before moving on to the next category here?
Yeah, not. I guess like the other big surprise was how well the Pierce Brosnan ones held up for me.
Yeah,
100%. Like when we started doing this, I was like, I'm probably gonna like GoldenEye just fine. I'm gonna hope that it holds up, as well as I think it does in my head.
Yeah.
And then every other one of the Pierce Brosnan era, I'm just gonna probably think is meh, blah. And then getting into them, I was like, oh, these are actually like way better than I remember them being. Yeah. And especially like it was this weird like level of kismet of us watching Tomorrow Never Dies with Michelle Yeoh, like right after I watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, where she's having this like wonderful career renaissance kind of moment right now, and just being like, oh, like she was great in this 25 years ago or whatever it was, and is still phenomenal. And it was disappointing because I've seen like on a handful of the lists kind of, since doing this project, I get served a whole crap ton more Bond things, and like recommended posts and stuff like that. And I read one not too long ago that was like, best female, co-stars of Bond or whatever. And like Michelle Yeoh was nowhere in there. I'm like that is a terrible,
a lot of disrespect,
like oversight.
A lot of disrespect.
Yeah.
Look, Tomorrow Never Dies is a movie that so many people sleep on, I think. And we talked about it at the time where like, I think it is just sort of like in between so much shit where like GoldenEye came out and was like huge, and Was Not Enough came out and was also massive, but also was like much more like critically maligned, right, in a degree. And I feel like a lot of people don't have strong thoughts on Tomorrow Never Dies. It's sort of like, all right, that's the other one he did, right? It's like, that's not the 2 bad ones or the 1 great one. It's like, that's the other one. And I was sort of in that camp for like years too. And then watching it again, it's like, oh, this movie's like great. Like it's a really just super fun movie. And yeah, Wei Lin is such a great Bond character, who more than holds her own both against Bond and also like the pantheon of other great kind of female co-stars he's had over the years. She's absolutely should be on any like top 10 list for them as well. And I would actually probably agree that that's one of my maybe not biggest surprises, because I was more confident that I would like it. But I guess one of my biggest surprises is more just the, I think, inherent nature of doing any sort of rewatch, which is like finding new things that you like, right? And seeing what movies you maybe enjoy a little bit less, but also the movies that you enjoy more than you ever have before, right? Like getting to go to The Living Daylights and having like a blast with that and really enjoying that one more than I had before. Getting to go to Tomorrow Never Dies and enjoying that one more than I like had ever had before, and being like, this movie's great. Or even get into like Die Another Day and being like, Die Another Day is a ton of fun, right? Like that movie has issues, but like I really enjoyed my time with it, and I was really happy to see just how much I loved it, right? Down to like movies I knew I would enjoy, but was like surprised by just how much I loved them, right? Like from Goldfinger itself, which I'd always been like my like second or third favorite Connery film, now very much being like, oh, it's easily his best, to even stuff like Casino Royale, which I'd always liked, and then been like, oh wow, this movie is just about perfect, right? Like it's always fun to kind of see the things that kind of sneak up and surprise you while doing a rewatch, whether it's Star Wars, James Bond, or anything else. And Tomorrow Never Dies absolutely is one of the biggest winners of that for me this time around.
I'm curious for you, like, because obviously we talked about a lot going into this. Like, you had your favorites, and you obviously grew up, and like Connery is your Bond from your childhood and stuff like that. And then like when we did the You Only Live Twice, like and really having to kind of like come to terms with and confront like the multitude of problems of that movie. Like, I'm curious if you were surprised by how much maybe some of your opinions changed, and whether or not that was like directly in response to examining this with another person, with a someone as less experienced like myself on this, or like, and if like seeing it through my eyes ended up kind of coloring or changing your perspective over some of these rankings at all.
It's really interesting. I think it's a great question, actually. I think that unquestionably doing this journey together, I think has sort of influenced both of us a little bit, right? And kind of how we view things and feel about certain movies more than the other. And it's also infectious to get excited about something together, which I think is partially why we each loved like Living Dead so much, right? It was just such a like nice reprieve after the Moore era, or also why we each, I think, have like a bit of a soft spot for Diamonds Are Forever, because we just got to like watch that one together in person, right? And for You Only Live Twice, it was always sort of a movie that, as a kid growing up, at least through probably like 2000, at least for the first few years being a Bond fan, right? Like it was my favorite Bond movie for a number of years. I would say at least until probably like '06 and Casino Royale, where I kind of was a bit older when I did that rewatch, and maybe I ranked, from Russian level a little bit higher or whatever. And I think my thoughts on You Live Twice are largely down to, I think it's a great kids movie, right? Like that, like, I think it's so easy to just be captivated by the end of that movie and just kind of forget everything else, honestly. Because I think that movie's ending is so extravagant and so over the top, and like there are ninjas in an underground volcano layer with explosions and a missile, and we're going to space, and there's like a secret boss guy and he's got his face revealed, and it's like, holy shit, like there's so much happening and there's like a piranha tank that like people fall into, like there's so much happening that is so like extravagantly over the top and like instantly kind of iconic, that I think it's very easy to see why someone would be excited about that if they watch it as a kid. And I think in the same vein, I think that in terms of kind of my change in thoughts, I can't say never, but like I certainly haven't been unaware of the issues with You Only Live Twice, at least since, the mid 2000s, right? By like 2006, right? I was reading like Entertainment Weekly's ranking of the Bond movies and could, read and view their thoughts on like the movie's problems with like race, for example. And so like I've been aware of it, since then at least, right? And so I think for me it was more so, at least in the first few kind of years up until Skyfall, where I did like my last big like rewatch ranking, where like it was no longer my favorite Bond movie, but it was someone that I really loved, because it was just kind of like, look how great that ending is though, kind of thing, right? And look how cool the idea of like them killing off Bond is to like get rid of his enemies, which I still think is a cool idea. But it was also one that, whether consciously or not, I just didn't watch for the ensuing decade either after Skyfall, as I watched other ones, but not that one. And so coming to it again, I think it's also a combination of, I'm not 20 years old anymore. I've changed. I've grown. I've evolved. The world has changed a lot in its handling of these things in that 10-year period. And I think both having you alongside with me, having other people in our lives, having people who I think can say, hey, this is not great, right? And the fact that the movie, even outside of all of those issues, is also just like, yeah, like, even if none of those issues existed, that movie would still be plagued by the fact that Sean Connery is just burnt out. Like, he's so clearly at the end of his rope in that movie. I mean, sort of rightfully so, like how much he was hounded and exhausted and just kind of chased all around Japan while filming that. And having to do that's his 5th movie he made in 6 years for the Bond series. Like, it's, yeah, like he, was just spent, I think. And so even outside of those issues, it's just a movie that I think is plagued by an exhausted James Bond that is almost more like a travel documentary for like chunks of that movie, that just sort of meanders about for a lot of the second act, where they're like not really doing anything. Like, it's got other issues. I still think the ending of that movie is great, in a lot of ways, just in terms of like how like absurd and cartoonish it is. But yeah, I mean, I think I've always tried to say for James Bond or Star Wars or anything I love, Scrubs, anything I love, right, that I think if you love something, if you also being able to point out its issues and its flaws and its mistakes, and You Only Live Twice is full of them. And, did I think I would go into this podcast and have You Only Live Twice ranked in my bottom 10 movies? No. But I also am like, okay, it'd be like, yeah, like it's a weak Bond movie. It's Sean Connery's weakest of his first 5, probably. Pretty easily, and also be okay with that because there are lots of other good Bond movies. And so, yeah, that's like a negative surprise, but yeah, surprise for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on from surprises, though, Trevor, and talk about how many people were killed. We don't have a total series kill count because we're not maniacs, but I did think it'd be fun to bring up the list of all 25 movies, where it currently stands at 19 correct and 6 incorrect. Trevor, if you would be a doll, though, and pull up Quantum of Solace for me here so we can see that movie, because for whatever reason it wasn't listed as one that got right or wrong.
Quantum Solace?
Yeah.
Pull that up.
But right now I have 19 of the movies I correctly identified the James Bond kills in it, and 6 I didn't. So can I break 20 or not? That is the question.
Quantum of Solace. I think you got that one right. I think that was one that like you got right on a technicality. Yeah, that's you got that one right, but because you guessed the right number, but you guessed the wrong people.
I'll take it.
I remember that one, yeah.
I'll take it. So we're gonna get that one correct then.
Because yeah, that was in particular like I have it pulled up now. Yeah, it was Mitchell, who was the guy in the bell tower fight. Bond shoots Mitchell. Yeah, so basically the guy at the beginning of the movie, Bond kills. Then Edmund Slate was the guy he stabs in the neck, or the guy with the knife. And then the Colonel and Elvis, the weird henchman guy that gets killed by like explosion kind of thing. That was that one. So yeah, I think you'd like completely forgotten about those, but you were like, I think they're gonna pull some bullshit on me, and so I'm gonna guess 4, and you guessed 4, and I was like, damn it, you get this one.
Yeah, and then No Time to Die I got right as well. So yeah, I finished. I had miscounted earlier, but ironic enough, with getting Quantum right, I actually do finish at 19 and 6 correct for the series. I'm pretty happy with that. The 6 I got incorrect being Dr. No, the very first one, Thunderball, Live and Let Die, For Your Eyes Only, License to Kill, and Casino Royale. I got at least one wrong for every single Bond, except for having a perfect run for Pierce Brosnan. So almost like I've seen those movies a whole heck of a bunch. Very excited. 19 and 6. I'll take that. Absolutely. Trevor,
real quick, I did a quick like Google search kind of thing here, and it looks like the total kills per 007museum.com.
That seems legit to me.
Is 1,299, averaging 59 kills per movie.
It checks. That actually does sound about right. 52 a movie.
And of those 1,299, 366 of them were Bond's kills, averaging 16 kills per movie, with 947 being attributed to everybody else across that series.
Yeah. That is a lot of dead bodies. 1,200 kills. That's about one Rambo movie by the end of that series.
13, almost 1,300, 1,299. So yeah, just shy of 1,300.
One short. I wonder if that counts James Bond dying in No Time to Die, though. So maybe 1,300. Make it nice and simple. Trevor, I want to talk about one thing about the Bond series that I really love, and I think you enjoy as well, which are, of course, the gadgets. What are some of your favorite gadgets we've experienced over the 25 films you want to give a shout out to?
I mean, like, I'll definitely say like they weren't as memorable as I like anticipated they would be, or if they were memorable for the wrong reasons, like the air pellet gun thing from the one that blows up Kananga. Yeah. Like
classic.
The gadgets I think of are like the immediate go-tos are like the pen because of Boris from GoldenEye, or the watch because I use that watch a ton in GoldenEye. And then like the cars, like it always comes down to like the cars. Like a whole bunch of the other stuff, it's like, oh, they were fun for the movie they were in or whatever. Especially, I think this was like the big thing of the Brosnan era was like, here's a gadget, and we're gonna give you this gadget for like one use. And
exploding ring on glass.
Exactly.
Boom.
Yeah, do that. Or I mean, like, and that I guess starts with From Russia with Love, where you get like the suitcase, and he goes through and says, here's everything you've got in the suitcase. And then by the end of the movie, all of them get used once. So like it's that kind of stuff. I get like my favorite with a bullet is probably the phone controlled car in Tomorrow Never Dies. Pierce Brosnan. Like that scene is like so iconic and like burned in my brain of driving through that parking garage with him just in the back seat, like on his touch,
giggling,
on his touchpad pre-smartphone device. And like rewatching that and realizing the other uses that phone also has, be it as like a little stun gun, or the antenna pulls out for a lockpick kind of thing. I think that's probably my favorite of the gadgets.
That's a great answer. I mean, I was definitely going to give a shout out to that Pierce Brosnan scene from Tomorrow Never Dies. I have always liked it, but watching it again now, I really do enjoy how much it seems like Pierce is just having a blast just doing that scene a bunch of times, and it's a legitimately great like car chase scene.
Yeah,
that is such a cool way to take something that's been done in 17 other movies in the series, plus countless other films that have been inspired by James Bond, and do it in a totally different manner. It's such a smart idea.
It is probably one of the most creative sequences of the entire series.
I agree. So I want to give a shout out to that. I think that's great.
Appreciating now something I definitely didn't appreciate when originally watching it, of like when he crashes it out the window, he's basically returning it to the Avis store because he rented it from Q as in an Avis costume. Which your product placement, knocking that out, two birds with one stone, knocking out your product placement, and also fun little action bit.
I think it's great. I really enjoy that scene. And I think it's, one of my favorite parts of the movie. Obviously, the DB5 would be my favorite gadget, I think, because it's just like it's just such an iconic vehicle. Trevor got a prop just for this episode. Everyone be excited.
The Lego DB5 with a whole bunch of like fun little gadgets and stuff. Yeah, I was showing it to Logan before. I bought it basically in honor of this podcast. To me, it's in honor of the ending here.
Perfect encapsulation of what you said about the briefcase from Russia with Love, right? Where like it is just filled with so many different gadgets and gizmos and everything's going on with it. And I think the ejector seat is obviously iconic, but also like it introduced an idea of like cars having like guns in the front and like oil slicks and like gas and like all of these things that we take for granted that like cars have and stuff.
Legitimate things like cell phones,
Yeah.
Like, or like
it's got a radar. It's got a radar tracking in there as well.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, like even in was it because it gets introduced in Goldfinger, right? Is the first time we get that. But in From Russia with Love, like the car has a car phone, and it's like that. Obviously, 20 years before that would be any kind of like
Actual
commonplace
thing.
in like the 80s,
Yeah.
let alone nowadays. So yeah,
Yeah,
a little bit
I
ahead of
think,
the curve.
and that's one of the fun things about the gadgets of James Bond is that like seeing this like insane idea become like a thing 20 years down the line, right? And that's the last big shout out I want to give for the gadgets in general is a bit of a twofold one, which is I just have always been a fan of James and Q having a briefing as like weird shit is just happening in the background, right? Like I think it's just really funny. Right? Like one of my all-time favorite gags of the entire Bond series, maybe of any movie, honestly. I think it's really funny. Is like Q inviting one of his assistants to like sit on a couch, and then the couch just swallows him up, and then he sits on the couch where the guy was at. Like I just find it so funny, and like 70-year-old Desmond Llewellyn's delivery on that is like pitch perfect, right? Like I think, whether it's like the tray that like chops the guy's head off, right? Like for like a dinner guest who's talking too much to, yeah, like the pin, the sandwich, don't touch it as my lunch. Like there's so many great moments in Q's lab and seeing kind of that evolve to like Q being on different locations, Q going to like work with Bond in like License to Kill, right? Like it's an alarm clock that's guaranteed to never wake you up kind of thing. Like there's so many great kind of like funny throwaway gags and gadgets throughout the series in those scenes. And we've talked about it a lot, but like it's one of the things that I most miss from the Daniel Craig era. Like I just think there is just this charm and fun to it. And, they only lost a couple minutes, but I think they always kind of bring a smile to my face. And so I really loved that, which leads into the other big thing I wanted to give a shout out to in the gadgets, because there isn't really a time to do it otherwise, which is Desmond Llewellyn in general. Right? Like, I think he is, such a piece of the series. Obviously, has done more movies with it for a longer period of time in terms of years than any other actor, producer, anyone. And one of my favorite things about Desmond Llewellyn is how his relationship with James Bond evolved over the years too. Right? From his kind of much more confrontational adversarial relationship with Sean Connery in particular, but even Roger Moore, to then kind of his more like familial father-son relationship with Timothy Dalton and Pierce Brosnan. I really love Desmond Llewellyn a whole bunch, and part of it might just be the fact that like we grew up in the Brosnan era where like he almost felt like a treasure by that point in time. Like this series treated him differently by then. And yeah, like I think he got so many great moments, he got so many great times to shine, and I think that Desmond Llewellyn is such a great piece of the series. And I also think that we've never had a bad Q either. I also think John Cleese is great. I really love Ben Wishaw's Q as well. But yeah, I mean, Desmond Llewellyn obviously is that character for so many different reasons. And I feel like every moment, if the movie had nothing that's going for it, it was probably going to have at least one good Q line in it. And that I think is a testament to Desmond Llewellyn.
Yeah, I mean, that role is easily the most fun role to have in a series like this.
Absolutely.
Like, especially, I mean, like we talked a lot in those early those films, like M is basically just an exposition dump.
Yeah.
Like he shows up, he tells Bond his mission, and then he's out of the movie the rest of the time. Whereas like Q, has a similar function of like, here are the things you're going to use in this movie, but he's giving Bond the toys. And so there's a joy and a delight to that.
And a quirkiness to it, yeah.
But like similar, like in that vein, I guess this would probably go as a surprise. Like the relationship between Lois Maxwell and the early Bonds was probably like the standout of those. The money penny dynamic that
with Sean Connery in particular, yeah. I agree.
Yeah, that like she was just fun as the person who was not gonna, like take Bond's shit. But like Bond can't flirt his way out of this stuff. She'll give it back to him, just as much. But like it stays, platonic and professional the whole time, kind of thing. Or maybe not always professional, but like they definitely didn't cross that line. And I think like as somebody who was introduced to that with Samantha Bond in the role opposite Brosnan, I think she does a great job kind of encapsulating that as well. And then obviously by the the I get like the best instance we get of that in the Craig era is before we know she's Moneypenny.
In Skyfall.
But like very much in those early Skyfall scenes, like she exudes a lot of that same energy. And so it makes it very fitting that like she is Moneypenny and has been Moneypenny all along. But yeah, I think that is, especially in those early Lois Maxwell era years, like that was easily Bond's most consistent relationship. And I think unfortunately gets like incredibly overlooked because it's the same kind of thing of like she's there for a scene or two and that's it.
Yeah. I think that I totally agree. I think Lois Maxwell and Sean Connery in particular, I think there's some of the moments that Sean Connery most comes alive in his kind of later movies where I think is increasingly kind of being burnt out a little bit.
She's also usually the only age appropriate relationship in the movie.
And I think in his early movies, it's some of the stuff that kind of most grounds him when Sean Connery is just like much more of a raw talent in like his first movie or two. I think Lois Maxwell is an absolute delight. I think she perfectly nails what you'd want that character to be in terms of just like you said, absolutely giving him his shit back, right? And part of what I think they nail in Connery and Maxwell's relationship is that like they're both so flirty and their chemistry is like perfect. And that I think is such a big element of the Bond and Moneypenny relationship. And it's also one that is almost impossible to kind of like plan. Like you can't help if people have chemistry or not together. Like it's just a thing that happens or doesn't, right? And I think Timothy Dalton's Moneypenny, through no fault of her own, is just sort of like entirely forgettable. Like they just don't have that same connection. And I think Roger Moore and Lois Maxwell's Moneypenny is more almost like friendly, but less of like a flirty back and forth. I almost feel more just like kind of collegial. It doesn't kind of strike the right balance. And I think Connery and Maxwell absolutely do in the same vein that like I think Pierce Brosnan and Samantha Bond is a great shout out. Like their scenes in Goldeneye and Tomorrow Never Dies in particular, like Samantha Bond has such great kind of like putbacks at Pierce that it evokes such great memories of Maxwell and Connery. And so yeah, I'd absolutely be remiss not to give Lois Maxwell a shout out alongside Desmond Llewellyn.
In that vein, I guess, like I don't know if you had a specific segment for this later, but like also like Judi Dench, MVP of the modern era, coming in at the
yes.
Brosnan era, of course. Obviously, we talked about her a lot over the last 2 months at the end of the run, but she's
fantastic.
She fantastic already, just in and of herself, but like just from the off, coming in and exploring and playing with that power dynamic of a woman in charge, especially early 90s for the Brosnan era version of this character, like that very much changes things up in I think an interesting way that and starts elevating that character out of just an exposition dump at the beginning of the movie.
Right.
I think obviously much more so in the Craig era, where she does become like a recurring presence throughout,
right,
as Craig's Bond is like becoming James Bond in those early missions and stuff like that, and she's kind of serving as the guiding hand up through Skyfall. Yeah, she MVP every day from her.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Judi Dench is fantastic. I mean, obviously she's Dame Judi Dench. But I think what she brought to the role of M, and again, I like Bernard Lee's M a lot too. I think he's like what you'd kind of the classic example of like what that character is. But Judi Dench obviously takes it to a completely different stratosphere, and is just given so much more to work with, both in terms of like what is probably one of the most like iconic scenes of the entire Bond series, which is her obviously calling Bond a sexist, misogynist dinosaur in Goldeneye, which is kind of just like instantly iconic and also instantly quotable. Everyone kind of immediately latch onto that as like how we're going to describe James Bond for the next 3 decades, whether it's true or not anymore. To her like big role even before the Craig era, right? Like the last 2 Brosnan movies, when The World Is Not Enough, with like her relationship with Electra King and Electra King's father, to Die Another Day and her kind of like recurring role there. like I think they recognized pretty quickly the talent they had on their hands and just increasingly gave her more work to do. And yeah, I mean, obviously her, finest hour is Skyfall, a film full of people giving their best performances. And the fact that she, probably deservedly so is, at the top of the heap of all the great performances, it is a testament to just how, talented of an actress she is. Cause she absolutely delivers so much of the kind of emotional weight and heart of that movie. And really of the Daniel Craig era, right? I think some of the issues with Craig's last two movies, in fact, in some ways for me, are the absence of Judi Dench's presence, which I think is felt partially because they keep pointing it out, and also just because they're mighty big holes and shoes to fill when she's kind of left.
It definitely becomes a much more adversarial relationship when it's Craig versus Ralph Fiennes,
especially No Time to Die.
Yeah, akin to those early era M's, and you'll have to forgive me. Like, I mean, even after this, I know that there were two in those early eras, but I don't remember which ones were Bernard Lee and which ones were the other guy.
Bernard Lee was the Connery era. Okay, more.
Yeah. Like, so much of that role again is just forgettable for me in a lot of those early ones, versus like at least in the later ones, like in the starting with Brosnan, it's not just they're there at the beginning of the movie and then gone. Like, there was a lot of checking in or following up, or they get their own sequences where we're following up and seeing what they're investigating while Bond is, out there on the ground or something like that.
I think
I was just gonna I don't know if you have something else to add, but I want to also throw in a Felix watch in here, in this block.
We can definitely do Felix watch. I mean, it actually kind of lines in well with this. But the last thing I wanted to kind of do for the MI6 crew as a whole is just to say that, I think one of the things to remember when watching James Bond movies is that like a lot of these templates didn't exist right at the time, right? And so like the idea of like the main character and like the flirty kind of relationship he's got with like a female colleague or a male colleague, if they're doing kind of an inversion of that, is directly traced to like Bond and Moneypenny, right? Like that is kind of like the template that so many films have used or TV shows have used since then, right? The idea of like, the taciturn gruff boss is like obviously very much Bond and M. And then the one that I think has had the biggest pop culture kind of impact is the idea of the quirky quartermaster gadget guy, like old dude giving you like tools to work with, is directly Desmond's Q for 40 years, right? Like that is just like that archetype that you see in so many action movies or non-action movies is directly traced to like Desmond's Q and like that template. And so like so much of the MI6 crew also just lives on in pop culture at large because they are just like the template that every other movie uses to kind of do their own thing, from stuff as varied as like Edgar Wright films to Simon Pegg films to Mission Impossible, who's Simon Pegg in that film actually, to kind of countless others. Like all of these action movies and all of these kind of adventure films are all just kind of doing their interpretation of like Desmond's Q in the lab, giving Bond a briefing, or Connery and Moneypenny kind of in the office floating back and forth. And so it's also kind of fun to see the seeds of that, because as we kind of talked about at the very beginning, this is kind of the first big pop culture franchise. And so and it also happened like as movies would kind of becoming more of a like pop culture phenomena in that sense, and blockbuster kind of thing. And so many ideas, for better or worse, you could argue, that Hollywood and kind of British cinema have kind of taken a hold of in the ensuing, 6 decades, can be directly related to this. I also want to give a shout out to one of my favorite things, which is just like the proliferation of these kind of knockoffs in like non-Western cinema is also really great, right? Like where sometimes they'll just try to like make the movie with a different title, but like, Bollywood versions of like these movies, right? Where again, it's just like, this is just James Bond, you put a different name on it kind of thing. And it's these like archetypes, right? Or same in like Korean cinema or Japanese cinema. Like they're just like the global impact of these films has been really fun to see as well.
Yeah, you mentioned it when talking about You Only Live Twice earlier, but like also the idea that when these movies first start coming out, you know, transatlantic travel is barely a thing.
Yeah.
So like a lot of these movies and
The hotels.
the globe hopping nature of them
Yeah.
ends up becoming like a showcase piece of like, let's go to all these exotic locations and take the audiences there with us, which
Yeah.
like does seem just so commonplace nowadays. And in the modern era, it's like, oh, of course they're gonna shoot this in 7 different countries to
But
show all these things. But like, yeah, you like putting
that
it in
was
the
not the
context of,
standard at all, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that in particular is something that is like so underappreciated, I think, about the Bond series, that like they actually filmed them in the locations. Like they were actually in, the Bahamas, Jamaica, the Swiss Alps, Japan, obviously, infamously, Nassau kind of thing, right? And so I think the idea of, I think nowadays we kind of ascribe it to like the Indiana Jonesification of a film, but in reality, this predated that by 2 decades. And so like it is so
But Indiana
kind of
Jones puts it on a map in a graphic, and you see the red lines,
right.
the plane flying from location
Oh
to
no,
location.
we'll get that. We'll get to that in Indiana Jones in review. But like, I think that like, yeah, it is sort of funny to think that like even something as simple as that we take so for granted in like cinema nowadays did just like have to start somewhere, and it was mostly here.
Yeah. And like, I would say another like surprise in that vein was just how stupid and terrible the producers were in this series over the time. But like
Broccoli, yeah, never
that
forget.
element of it seems like, and I don't know if this was, necessarily like specific pulls or anything that we had, but like in a lot of those Connery and Moore movies, it almost feels at times like they were like they shopped out the story based on which country would give them the most money, or the best perks, or just where they wanted to go on vacation. It's almost
Mhm.
the Adam Sandler grown-ups kind of, or Adam Sandler Netflix thing these days, that the ongoing joke of like wherever Adam Sandler wants to go on vacation is where he's going to make his next Netflix movie.
Right. I think that you can't understate the impact of the Broccoli family on, and Harry Saltzman for the first 8 movies on the James Bond series, right? And it, I can't say it's mostly bad decisions because it's led to a 60-year long running franchise that's made billions of dollars at the box office and obviously has lots of fans, me included. But certainly they've made a lot of baffling decisions or just outright bad decisions. And also, Cubby Broccoli in particular, I think Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson kind of got their shit together a bit more effectively. But Cubby Broccoli in particular, I think, just sort of burned a lot of bridges along the way, from kind of the relationship with Lois Maxwell, obviously when that one came to a conclusion, to, I would say, probably most infamously, the relationship with the original James Bond, which was so kind of strained from the early 60s dynamics with Broccoli and Saltzman that it basically was never repaired. And Sean Connery kind of always had a chip on his shoulder and a grievance to kind of wage against the series that originally had made him a star, just because of how he felt he had been handled by the producers. And so I think if you kind of view it in the sense of like the biggest star of the entire series maybe ever produced, and one of its longest running characters, Maxwell, having issues, yeah, all of the other random characters who were cast because you're really attractive. Can you act? No. Can you speak the language? Dicey. Doesn't matter. We'll fix it in post.
Yeah.
The originators of we'll fix it in post. We'll take care of that in post kind of thing.
And
where
like,
it was Broccoli.
And fix it even there is a stretch.
Right. Yeah. And so, for every, I think, Tanya and From Russia with Love, where like I think it's done mostly well, where you can't really, she's dubbed pretty well, or like Gert Fraub in Goldfinger, is dubbed the entire movie, but I think is dubbed well. There are a lot of examples of that person is not dubbed well, especially whenever we go to Japan and You'll Live Twice, where they're off by like half a second at times, if not more. Yeah, there are lots of bad decisions by Broccoli. To say nothing of the fact that obviously once Sean Connery left, we got like a decade and a half of pretty bland rough Bond movies that he kind of oversaw, with like one exception in Spy Who Loved Me. But yeah, let's run on to something more positive now, Trevor. Felix watch. There are lots of great Felix sliders, but I would be flabbergasted if we're not on the same page as to who the best Felix slider is. Which should be obviously Jeffrey Wright.
Yeah, I was gonna say there was one good Felix slider for me, like, and it was Jeffrey Wright. And that's,
part of this,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say part of this is that like I literally was just writing the No Time to Die review, peek behind the curtain when this is being filmed, right before doing this podcast, and so like I was just getting on this topic, but like. I think one of the things that makes Jeffrey Wright's Felix Leiter so great, aside from the fact that Jeffrey Wright is just a great actor and super talented, is the fact that they did just allow him to grow in that role and allow his relationship with Bond to grow as well, right? They didn't recast him. And so you could just kind of build up this relationship over time so that by the time we get to No Time to Die, which I would argue is his very best performance as Felix Leiter, arguably, I would probably say not arguably, but just straight up the best Felix performance of all of them. It's because we've earned those moments with him and Bond. We've earned that time. We've earned, obviously, his, spoiler alert, death, right? And that sequence and the impact it leaves on Bond, but also the impact I think it leaves on the audience. If you've been watching these movies for, Casino Royale was 15 years before No Time to Die, right? It's even with this character for a decade and a half. And I think that is something to be said for, I think, trust in the audience. Just be like, yeah, like this is going to be one story. And at times that doesn't work, I think, but at times it does. And I think in the relationships are almost always the parts of it that work the best because it just allowed this to be one continuous story for Daniel Craig. And I think Jeffrey Wright's Felix is a great example of that.
Yeah, it's one of those things like in a series that like had the MI6 crew as kind of a core crew for many, many years. The idea that they just continually hopped between Felix Leiter was such a weird, baffling decision. Like, I get that, like, there was an element of, like, the Jack Lord thing or whatever at the beginning. Right, yeah. But, like, I mean, Desmond Llewellyn wasn't in the first one either, so they could have just
It's a weird Brock decision. We can all just acknowledge what it is. Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah. And even the other, the other notable one of the one who was in Live and Let Die and then came back all those years later in
License Kill, David Hedison.
Yeah. Like, as somebody who we watched those, within a couple months of each other, I would not have picked that up, that was the same guy coming back and playing Felix all those years later. So I can't, like, it just it seems like there was zero payoff for that for like an audience of, this is somebody coming back to the role
normal
15 years
fans.
later,
right?
Because that character is always being played by somebody different. Right. So yeah, it's one of those,
including the movie directly before that, 2 years
exactly
prior, right?
Yeah,
that's
such like it's such a baffling like casting decision that like I think Jeffrey Wright benefits the most from, because he gets to just be the character over his series of movies. But I will say that the runner-up for me is not Felix Leiter, but Jack Wade, for the similar reason. Like, he's in two movies.
Great. He gets a great shout out.
He gets to play the Felix Leiter role over the course of a couple of movies. Even the Robbie Coltrane character, Valentine.
Zukovsky.
Like him getting to like them embracing, like, we've got actors. We need to fill this slot. We've already had a character that does that kind of thing. We can just kind of like loop him in and build this like continuity across these movies that you just never have prior to that, apart from that weird little core MI6 crew. Is just like, I think that's one of the things that I hope the series, when it comes back in whatever the next form is going to be, I hope it continues to embrace that element from the Craig era of
spoilers for 20 minutes from now.
Yeah. There you go. Let's keep, this, not because it's not even necessarily an MCUification. It's just, we're making movies that all revolve around the same cast of characters. Let's actually keep the same cast of characters across these movies. And I think, like, we talked about every now and then how much more fun it would have been if, a random spy that pops up had been Agent Triple X or whatever from if there had been crossover even in the like relationships of Bond over the
Or
years.
Wayland making an appearance again.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
But the fact that like even that relationship is just written off every movie and never explained as to why Bond is out there with, gallivanting with new women every time. Like, I think that's one of the, especially from those early eras, I think that's one of the disappointing elements. And so the Daniel Craig era for me is, a standout because it felt like a continuous story that they were telling, and not just, hey, here's this version of the character who is going to swing wildly differently across, multiple movies in their own, tenure as the character. And that's going to be supported because everybody else around them is also wildly different people. So,
yeah. I think that is one of the things that I give a lot of credit to the Pierce Brosnan era for a lot, actually. And I think a lot of ways of like, again, being sort of the prototype for that in terms of like, those movies are clearly, I think, you would watch those in the order they came out in, and that is going to make the most sense, right? Whether it's Jack Wade obviously being introduced and making an appearance in the next one, or Zukovsky being in GoldenEye to then obviously him dying in The World's Not Enough, right? His relationship with M, who's introduced in that one kind of thing, right? Like they're sort of feeling their way out in terms of building this like larger kind of extended universe. They make James certainly the most human he's been, maybe with the exception of the Timothy Dalton era up to that point, which is him just being like a person who's had like prior relationships, like with Terry Hatcher's Paris Carver kind of character, right? And I think that James is also a James who kind of gets to like have romantic relationships, right? Like I think his and Natalia's relationship in GoldenEye, for example, is one where like I could have seen them just like be together where that movie ended, and like just like that be a relationship that kept forward. And I think if obviously she wasn't evil, him and Electra King could have been another one where like, yeah, they have a really genuine bond. You get to see Bond care for someone in that vein. And I think that it's, again, I think part of it is that like, it's always kind of popular to dislike the Bond before the current Bond. And so I think Pierce Brosnan has kind of gotten like a bit of a rough time in like the Craig era. But like, I think a lot of the things that Daniel Craig and his era built on were kind of laid by Pierce Brosnan, what that era did. And I think those relationships and returning characters are a great example of that. And also just making Bond be someone who feels emotions, right? I think, out before Timothy Dalton, not since like the early, like the first like 2 or 3 Sean Connery movies did James Bond feel like a person who felt emotions. And most of Timothy Dalton's emotions were just like him being pretty upset,
anger and rage and fury,
or just like depressed. And so like Pierce Brosnan very much, the kind of expression here is that he's kind of like the romantic Bond, and I think obviously romance to be a big part of the Craig era as well, and kind of 2 key examples that ended and closed out his era. And so I think Pearson's era is one that I think we each have a soft spot for because it's our first era of Bond that we grew up with, but also I think it's one that I'll be excited to hopefully see it be viewed more favorably as in its like totality as we go to like a new Bond now. Speaking of things like that, Trevor, let's run through our official list of favorite villains and see where we jointly ranked all of the villains of the James Bond series. There are a lot, in case you're wondering, because we also have some henchmen and henchwomen in there. But our official Villains Corner ranking as it stands after 25 James Bond movies is Raul Silva at number 1, which I think we each would agree is totally deserved.
Yep.
Because we made the list. Alex Trevelyan as 006, another one that is just, great. Franz Sanchez in 3rd, Ark Goldfinger in 4th, and then Lashif at number 5. Right outside the top 5 is the highest ranked kind of sidekick with Onatop at number 6. Mr. Wint and Mr. K, I forgot we put them that high. I love that. At number 7, totally deserved. Totally, I could do a whole thing on Mr. Wint and Mr. Kid. General Koskov is number 8. Max Zorin is 9. And then Dario rounds out the top 10 as the second highest ranked. Well, no, I guess the third highest ranked henchman. Then we shift gears into Electra King, Scaramanga, Blowfield 2.0, Red Grant, Kananga slash Mr. Big, Sefin, Elliot Carver, and then we get the triple hit of Henchman and Jaws, Oddjob, and Mr. Hinks, who it should be mentioned, I think we both probably agree is the last like great villain on this list. Mr. Hinks is great. Shout out to Dave Bautista. Then we get Blowfield 4 or 5.0, depending on if you count For Your Eyes Only. Then we get Colonel Moon and Gustav Graves, Brad Whitaker, and then Blowfield 1.0, Blowfield 3.0, which, if anything, I do like Charles Graves' Blowfield a lot, though. It's a hell of a lot of fun. And then the final bottom two... Oh, actually, no, it's not. I have to scroll down the page more. And then we have Hugo Drax, Emilio Largo, Renard, Rosa Klebb, Dr. No, Kamal Khan, and then Dominic Green, General Orlov, Ari from For Your Eyes Only, and our least favorite James Bond villain of them all, Carl Stromberg, who just wanted to destroy the world so we could live in underwater cities. Whose dream isn't that? Trevor, those are all of our villains, and the official That Nerdy site, That Bond Show ranking of the villains and hench people. I'm pretty happy with that much part. I mean, if we each would change certain things, but on the whole, reading it through like that, I'm pretty content with that list.
Yeah, it's funny, like, because there's definitely a lot where, like, a lot near the bottom of the list, I'm like, I don't even remember what movie they were in. And I will say, like, the highest ranked one that, like, when I read it, I'm like, who was that again? Oh, that's right. I remember who that was. Is General Koskov. And I think we were just both so high on how much we like the Living Daylights.
Is great.
That I was like, and he is a very fun villain in that. And also, like, the first villain that, like, doesn't die at the end of the movie, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very heavily hinted that he's about to die, or he's going to die when they take him off to the KGB. Right. But yeah, it's like seeing that name on there, it's like, who's that? Because he kind of breaks that mold of, like, he's not super memorable in terms of, like, iconography, right, or menace, or like, you know, Max Zorin, who's just, like, you know, on as high as he is because Christopher Walken is fun to watch, right. Despite how bonkers and stupid Max Zorin's plan is. And how he basically is his own worst enemy.
100%.
But yeah, I mean, the big thing I will also highlight is, like, I like that I mostly won out in, like, Blowfield isn't a great character. And I think like
highest ranked one is
Blowfield 2.0 being our highest ranked one at, like, you know, number 15 or whatever that is. Like, at least is a testament to that. But I think also this was, you know, a contentious thing in our Spectre thing. Like, I would still say Christoph Waltz is a better Blofeld than that one. But this was what I alluded to kind of when I, you know, tweeted out to promote the episode. I think your love of the character of Blofeld, as, you know, seen through the lens of a kid and through that scary scar and through, you know, obviously what the same things that Mike Myers loved about that character is what, like, carries that character in prominence. Where I mean, like, he's effectively your Moriarty to our James Bond Sherlock Holmes, who can be very good or who can be very bad depending on the interpretation you're getting. And
100%.
I think we got a lot of very bad ones in those early years. Yeah, they might be fun to watch, like the Charles Gray one.
Hell yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're good necessarily.
No.
So yeah, it's a fascinating character that is so weirdly hung up because of all the, like, the legal disputes around that again, like, if the Broccoli's were better producers and Harry Saltzman was a better producer, they would have just bought the guy out, you know, in the 70s or whatever, and put that all to rest. But the fact that went on to be a 40-year struggle for them is just, like, bonkers and silly and absurd.
Everyone was dead, yeah.
And as a result, like, you get, I mean, like, obviously after that run, we had a bunch of characters that were clearly just Blofeld with different names.
Stromberg, Hugo Drax, immediately, like, pretty much,
that all just become forgettable as a result of that, or you know, like, or they become the least memorable thing about their movies or their evil plans or whatever. It's,
That's
like
a great...
Stromberg. Stromberg's Atlantis thing or whatever that was out there was like a freaking great lair, but he's such a bland, forgettable bad guy that,
right.
It just silly.
That Carl Stromberg is such a waste of a character when they give this actor webbed fingers and then never decide to show that off in the movie. It's like, what are we doing with this character who's just a bluff? Like, they just didn't have any idea what they wanted to do with him. Mm-hmm. And I think you actually hit on something that's a really great point of maybe partially why the Roger Moore era villains were so lackluster, right? Because I think he pretty clearly had the weakest run of villains. Is that like they were so fixated on like constantly trying to be like, oh, maybe we'll get Blofeld in the next movie, and then they didn't, and be like, all right, we have to kind of get like a Blofeld stand-in for Spy Who Loved Me or for Moonraker or the so-and-so movie. And so like they kept almost trying to get him and they didn't. Even like for Your Eyes Only, like they obviously allude to Blofeld in the beginning of that movie, and then the movie's actual villain is our second lowest ranked one, right? It's just like, yeah, like a whatever forgettable guy. Like it is such a waste of 15 years of movies. Just like none of them really having great villains. And even the villains we like out of Roger Moore's era, right, the highest ranked one of his entire run is Max Zorin, and how much of that is just down to the fact that it is just Christopher Walken being weird as shit, right? And then after that, it's Scaramanga, who is great, right? Who is a great villain, but it's still
in a bad movie, and even
that truly awful movie, yeah.
Like that is, I mean, it's just like Max Zorin is like Christopher Walken elevates that role. How much of it is
Christopher Lee? That's a great point.
Christopher Lee elevates Scaramanga.
Yeah.
Because like if you take Christopher Lee out of that, you're looking at a weird assassin with a third nipple being his defining feature, and it's like, what is the point of this? Yeah. But it's Christopher Lee who's phenomenal, and I would say like great. When we get that, I think like even a weak or lackluster villain like Safin maybe or Safin from No Time to Die is at least elevated by it being Rami Malek playing the role. And so but there versus like someone like General Koskov, who like I couldn't tell you that actor from Adam.
It's like an Eastern European
but
actor.
He did a great job with that and elevated that villain versus it being the other way around.
Right, that's a great point.
Yeah, or I mean, like go back to your Zenyatta top, and that being easily the first thing I ever would have seen Famke Jensen in before, a few years before X-Men, she goes on to be an X-Men. And she's just going so buck wild with that role and having so much fun with it that like she is a memorable part of that versus like, because we have at the bottom of near the bottom of our list General Orlov. She is basically General Orlov's henchman in that movie, and General Orlov is Trevelyan's henchman. So like she's like a third tier henchman in that movie, but she's so fun in it that she gets elevated in the same way that Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd did when we finally circled around to add them to our rankings.
I think there's such we kept using the line that we first came up with in Dumb and Forever, and it became one of the recurring like lines of the entire podcast, which is just like they knew what kind of movie they were in. And even in a bad movie, whether it's Christopher Lee, Man with the Golden Gun, like just nailing who that character should be an element in it, whether it's Anna Top in Goldeneye, who's in a great movie and is just completely unhinged in a great way in it. Obviously, Wint and Kidd, who originated the phrase, like they just know exactly what they're doing, and usually it's just them being really fucking weird and just like going balls to the walls with it and having to like a blast that it felt like.
I mean, Raul Silva, I think, is like the pinnacle of that, and I think that's why he's at the top of our list. Is Javier Bardem like knew he was getting to sink his teeth into a Bond villain kind of role. I mean, same with Sean Bean. Like Sean Bean gets to play
so good as Alex Trevelyan. Yeah,
like they are as high on our list as they are because, like, I would say that like Fran Sanchez is that to a degree, but it's much more that like he's playing. Well, he knows what movie he's in, and the movie he's in is an 80s action movie where he is
it is a 2-hour episode
kingpin.
of Miami Vice, right? Yeah.
And so I think that's like all of our top tier kind
Right.
of fit that mold. Even going down to like
Yeah.
Lashif, Mads Mikkelsen, like
Yeah.
he knows what kind of bad guy he is in this movie,
Right.
and has gone on since then to kind of make that a touchstone of his career, being
Right.
those kinds of like off kilter bad guy characters, in fun and interesting ways.
Yeah. Agreed. 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 Trevor, that takes us to our movie ranking list. We're about to make it official here. Do you have any final changes you want to make to your list before I run through this?
Nope, I don't believe so.
Okay.
I've been kind of keeping track in this in a separate doc, so I'm pretty sure I'm all happy with this list. Like
Okay.
the things I might change again would be like, like the list is a weird mix of like, recognizing a quality of a movie versus like rewatchability.
Right.
And so like if I tip the scale one way or another on those kinds of things, it'd be like rewatchability. I would definitely move Goldfinger and Spy Who Loved Me further down on this list, because I just
Right.
have zero interest in rewatching those compared to some of the Brosnan or Craig ones that are below them. But
Mm-hmm.
factoring in that like those are the easy standouts of their eras,
Right.
I'm okay kind of keeping them where they are.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and that's part of the kind of balancing act of something that is a 6 decade long thing, is balancing, rewatchability, balancing like cultural impact, right? Like groundbreakingness for the films, overall quality, kind of all are factored into it. And so Trevor's
Yeah.
25.
Well, I guess one
Oh,
last thing I'll say on this is like I have at the bottom of my list is For Your Eyes Only, and that one is definitely like I was angry when I watched that one and ranked it,
yeah.
and I wanted nothing more than to get back to playing Horizon Forbidden West at the time. So that was
Yeah.
probably not very fairly ranked, but also I just was so over that era of films at the time that I'm
Right.
like,
Yeah.
fuck this movie. This
Never
like
forget. Yeah. You and
Thunderball
Jared. Yeah.
Thunderball was on the bottom of my list for a long time, and then this one came along. And I was like, fuck this series. I'm done with it. I'm ready to.
It's a
I was
perfect
ready to walk away from the
encapsulation
podcast
of the
after
Roger
watching
Moore
that one.
era. So Trevor's official list of the James Bond series goes. We'll do it in reverse order to make it more fun, even though we have the same topic pick. It is going to be For Your Eyes Only at the bottom, followed by Thunderball, which is one of our biggest points of disagreement. Moonraker, which is not. Man with the Golden Gun, You Only Live Twice. Octopussy, Doctor No, A View to a Kill. Diamonds Are Forever. Absolutely. I love that you have this so high. Live and Let Die, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, For Your Eyes, or nope, not For Your Eyes Only, From Russia with Love, Quantum of Solace, The World Is Not Enough, Die Another Day, The Spy Who Loved Me, and then I think we're in the top 10 now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Spy Who
6,
Loved Me is my
7,
number
8,
10.
9, 10. Spy Who Loved Me number 10. So Spectre at 9, Goldfinger at 8, Tomorrow Never Dies at 7, The Living Daylights at number 6, License to Kill at number 5, and then Goldeneye at 4, No Time to Die at 3, Casino Royale at 2, and Skyfall as your number 1 James Bond movie.
Yeah,
that's a great list. Very similar.
My bottom
chunk of movies.
My bottom 10 movies are all Moore and Connery era stuff, which I don't know if I would have fully predicted that going in, but like I'm not terribly surprised by it again from kind of everything we've already discussed. Of like, I just don't have a an affinity for that era of filmmaking, and yeah, so those don't really get much higher as a result.
Right. I think that's fair. Then pulling up my list of movies here, my list of the 25 James Bond films. I've been constantly tinkering and, tapping away at this list for all 25 weeks. I've had my own Google Notes list that was kind of became my official list. That was a little bit different from the doc list that we'd run through every now and again on the podcast. And honestly, by the time my written ranking of all the movies goes out like a week after this podcast, probably, my list could even be slightly different, because like Trevor said, it depends honestly just as much as just like the given day on how I'm feeling about a particular movie and kind of my memories of it. especially in my case where I've seen all of these movies multiple times, and all of them except for probably the last two Daniel Craig movies at a minimum of 3 times each, if not more than that for everything kind of Pierce Brosnan onwards. But my 25 James Bond movie ranking as of 2022, my first new ranking in a decade, is going to be The Man with the Golden Gun in dead last, which was one spot worse than where it was in my last list. We've got Moonraker above that. The fact that Moonraker is in last is a testament to Man with the Golden Gun's terribleness. Fear Eyes Only above that. Diamonds Are Forever. Then we have Octopussy, Spectre as my lowest ranked of kind of the post Roger Moore era. You Only Live Twice, very much in its lowest spot ever. A View to a Kill, Quantum of Solace, The World Is Not Enough, Thunderball, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Dr. No, and then we've got No Time to Die, License to Kill, and then Tomorrow Never Dies is my number 10 pick if I quickly counted that correctly, followed by Die Another Day, Spy Who Loved Me, From Russia with Love, The Living Daylights, and a top 5 of Live and Let Die, Goldeneye, also number 4 on my list, Casino Royale, Goldfinger, and Skyfall, with a special little asterisk next to my top 3 of basically being like on any given Sunday, I could rank any of those top 3 ahead of the others. But that's where I currently sit. We have the same number 1 pick in Skyfall as our favorite That Bond Show James Bond movie. And as we talked about in the Skyfall episode, I think that's pretty fitting ultimately, just for, as I think I said in that podcast, if not the week after, I think there's totally a valid argument to be said that Skyfall is not the most fun James Bond movie to watch, but I think that every single thing Skyfall does, it does exceptionally well, whether it's just acting, whether it's cinematography, whether it's music, whether it's direction, whether it's, writing and storytelling, the themes it's undergoing, that it is a perfect kind of capstone at the time to be the 50th anniversary of James Bond. And yes, it's as our number 1 favorite James Bond movie. Trevor, any thoughts on the list?
So I have a couple things I want to ping you about. One, because I've been kind of keeping track of this on a separate doc myself, as you've been going, and it looks like the only thing you changed between like what we had when we did No Time to Die a couple weeks ago and now is you bumped No Time to Die down below License to Kill. That's the only like those two were switched around.
Yeah.
I went through and I pinged you about one of these in the Slack not too long ago, but you didn't actually put a score on Casino Royale in your review for Casino Royale. So I'm curious what your score for that is and what your score for No Time to Die is, because we're recording this before you've sent over your review on that one. So I'm curious what those are, because I also have like how that ranking that you just did compares to how you've scored the movies overall.
I mean, Casino Royale's a 10.
Okay.
It'd be a 10. I legitimately think that, I legitimately think Casino Royale is like one of those like one perfect film kind of things, right? Like I like if you're watching it again now with like fresh eyes, like that movie I think is just like there's basically nothing I would change about it. So that's a 10. And then No Time to Die, I could give you like a lot of clever or whatever answers, but like ultimately, like I think No Time to Die is like, as I said, 7-8 months ago, I've said still to this day, I think it is the perfect description of that is a good 7 out of 10 movie. Maybe 7.5, but like I think a 7 out of 10 is just like so fitting for like how to describe it as like that is the one good Daniel Craig movie. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I like just giving that a 7.
That was. I predicted based on how you've kind of ranked everything else that would be a 7.5.
Right.
Because here's how your rankings shake out. So you put Golden Gun, Man with the Golden Gun at the last. That matches with your list, which is you gave that a 4 out of 10.
That movie's awful.
Moonraker is next up at number 24, which you gave a 5, so it matches there. Your first difference here in your top 25 is you gave Spectre a 5.5, which by your ranking, you've got it at like at 20th, but based on your scores, that would be number 23. Then we have
Okay.
For Your Eyes Only and Diamonds Are Forever. Both got 6s. Those are pretty much down at the bottom of your list. Again, like you ranked Spectre higher, but your score would say otherwise. Then we have Quantum of Solace and World Is Not Enough with 6.5s. So you have those a little bit like scored a little bit lower than you have them ranked on your list.
What did I give View to a Kill?
View to a Kill, Octopussy, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and Dr. No are all 7s. So those kind of are jumbled a little bit based on
Octopussy is 7
on where your list goes.
That's interesting.
And whether or not you throw No Time to Die in there at the end. Thunderball and You Only Live Twice are 7.5s. You Only Live
really?
Yeah, You Only Live Twice ends up being like the highest jump because of that. You gave it, like, obviously as you mentioned, it's ranked number 19 on your ranking, but here that would put it at number 14.
I gave it a 7.5. Wow.
With that 7.5.
I gave Octopussy a 7. It's wow.
Yeah.
I give it a 7.5.
Yep.
Wow.
Tomorrow Never Dies.
I was feeling those ninjas, apparently.
Yeah. Die Another Day and From Russia with Love all got 8s.
I think it's totally fair.
License to Kill is your second highest kind of like difference, and a little bit less so now because you shifted it and No Time to Die around, but you gave that one, that is your only 8.5. Spy Who Loved Me got a 9. Living Daylights got a 9. Live and Let Die got a 9. Then we had Goldeneye with a 9.5. Goldfinger, which you have as your 7, got a 9.75. This is the only place you decided to give the thing a 40-point scale, and I was like, what the hell, Logan? And then now you have given Casino Royale a 10 to go alongside your 10 for Skyfall. So ranking wise, there your Goldfinger and Casino Royale would slip, but
if I did it again, I would give Goldfinger a 10. I would just
put those all in the 10 bucket.
Right, I'd give all those 10 because I think Goldfinger is also like a perfect movie, like the other two. I think they're just like perfect films. I would rank You Only Live Twice lower. I don't know. It's so funny that I give Octopussy a 7. Before, as we were like winding down on the podcast, I like went back and like started reading a lot of my reviews again. And like some of them are also funny because like if you read them, I don't necessarily know if they match the scores at times, and that also is like part of the trouble.
I edited those things for grammar and content. I never bothered to really pay attention to what you actually gave the score to a thing.
Yeah. And that's also like, that's just like the thing I did at the end. I mean, like some of them, like I like thought about it a lot for some of them, right? Like where I want to rank them, and other ones are just like, yeah, that's a 7. And it's also obviously compounded by the fact that like as you go through 25 movies, your definition of like what a 7 is changes, right? Versus like what an 8 is changes versus like, so these are also kind of like the issues that like, it's also just inevitably going to change, right? Because like No Time to Die is a better movie than A View to a Kill, right? But I'm going to give each of them a 7, but it's because like what it was at the time versus now. And also because like an important factor in a lot of these rankings, I think too, is that like the context they're being released in for me. So like, yeah, like I give Spectre, I do not like Spectre, to be fair, but like I also give Spectre a 5.5 because of like what it is following and like the first 3 Daniel Craig movies, and I think it's a big drop from that versus, maybe this is part of why I gave Octopussy a 7 and A View to a Kill a 7, is that like after how bad I think Moonraker and For Your Eyes Only are, they're not that bad, right? And so it's like, oh, this is not great by any means, but it's definitely like, oh, this is good at least. This is like a better movie kind of thing. I really like that. Yeah, you should slack me that list. That's really funny. I like that.
The other
kind of kept track of that.
The other thing I wanted to kind of highlight across our lists that I've pulled together across our lists is kind of the biggest differences between our lists. And you and I talked about this a little bit after one of our last recordings, but our biggest difference is basically a tie between Live and Let Die and Spectre. There's an 11 film
Is it a
gap.
point difference between Live and Let Die?
Between those.
I forgot about that.
Because I have Live and Let Die down at 16. You have it up at number 5.
It's 16.
And then flipped, I have Spectre at number 9. And you have it down there at number 20. Behind that, there's a 9 film gap between No Time to Die and Thunderball, where I have No Time to Die up
perfectly fit in for those two films.
Up at number 3, and you have it down at number 12, and I have Thunderball as my penultimate number 24 versus you having it at 15. And then our the fifth one worth noting here is From Russia with Love, which we have a 7-film difference between. I have it down at 14, and you have it up at number 7.
I really like From Russia with Love.
There are 3 films that are in the exact same position across our lists.
Yes.
Skyfall, obviously at the top of both of our lists.
Number 1.
4. I missed one. GoldenEye is both of
Number
our
4.
respective number 4s. The Living Daylights is our respective number 6s. And then, weirdly, down near the bottom of the list, A View to a Kill just happens to land at number 18 for both of us.
What a perfect spot. I mean, I'll say that I think I talked about this in the podcast, but like, I pretty early on broke my list into like 3 chunks, like 3 buckets that I put from them where it's like, these are the great films, these are the ones that I think are like good to okay, these are the bad movies. And so even you read in the scores, like, an 8 or higher, right? Like I gave Die Another Day an 8, I think you said, and maybe Tomorrow Never Dies an 8.
Yep, both.
And those would be the only 2 that, like, looking at how I have it like broken out on like my like, notes folder on my iPhone. Those are the only 2 that like I have dropped out of the like great list. Like those are the ones where I'm like, those aren't great movies, I think, but I still gave like an 8 out of 10 on. Otherwise, Spiral of Me Onwards, I think are all like, those are the great Bond movies. And Die Another Day, Tomorrow Never Dies, Doctor No, License to Kill, No Time to Die. That like 5-movie run, which is like the movie's basically right. They're not quite great, I think, but they're like better than the okay bunch. Are also the ones that I've routinely had the hardest time ranking because they are, I think they are so close that I'm constantly bounding around, right? And then I'm also like, then I also have that thing of like me feeling bad about being like, is Die Another Day, should it be my like 8th favorite Bond movie? And I'm like, you know what? It's my list, and I like Die Another Day a lot. I think the movie's really fun, and so I had it at number 9 on my list, and I would do that again. I wouldn't change that. I think that movie's really fun, and it's got a lot of haters. And to those haters, I say you should watch some of the older movies again. You should watch some of the Roger Moore movies again, because Die Another Day has issues, but that movie is fun, and that is not a thing you can say about at least half of Roger Moore's movies. Trevor.
Yep.
Those are our thoughts on all 25 James Bond movies that have come out and that exist in the world that people can watch right now.
Of the official ones. We never sat down and did any of those non-Eon ones.
Yeah. Those are our thoughts on the James Bond series and all 25 films. But I thought it'd be nice to wrap up that Bond show by ending on a look ahead to the future, kind of what we want from.
We never really did a wrap up of Bond on Bond.
Bond on Bond
before. Before
let's do Bond
look
on Bond.
Ahead.
Let's do Bond on Bond. It's gonna be pretty quick. Trevor.
Yeah.
Some of your thoughts on Bond.
So we talked about this a lot. I know you and I definitely did off mic. Following the Timothy Dalton stuff, where I was like those 2 movies are so great. And at that point, I had seen the good Daniel Craig ones, and I had not seen, his weaker outings. So it was very much like is his 2 going to be enough to like keep him as my favorite Bond, or is Daniel Craig going to come in? And I think ultimately, especially I think in part because I even the weaker ones of his I liked better than you did. Ultimately, like Daniel Craig ekes it out, but it would have been very easy for Timothy Dalton if he'd had 1 or 2 more movies,
even just 1 more, I think,
to like maintain that top spot. I mean, like for sheer consistency, like his 2 movies
got the best batting average,
are
right?
number 5 and number 6 on my list.
Both of us are very high. Right?
So like on if we were to do kind of like a purely scored kind of thing, he probably ends up taking it. But like above that, for me at least, like Daniel Craig has my 1, 2, and 3, especially because I loved No Time to Die a lot more than you did, because I think it serves as a bit of finality for this arc of James Bond in the way that, a good Sherlock Holmes arc, is gonna be best when it has a definitive ending versus something else, versus something that's just going to continue going on ad nauseum. So I like, ultimately Daniel Craig, I think, becomes like ekes it out as my favorite Bond overall, because he got to play the entire arc of that character, as opposed to Timothy Dalton, who is great, but he's not
like an abbreviated
going
run.
anywhere with that character. He is an angry, rage-filled, darker, grittier Bond for 2 movies, and he's great in that, but like there isn't growth in the way that we get from Daniel Craig's era. And then Pierce Brosnan is rounds out my top 3 there.
So great.
For a similar, like, he doesn't get as much growth over the course of his run as Craig does, but he's fun throughout. Even in his weaker outings, Pierce Brosnan is never the weak part of his movies.
Yeah.
In which I just can't say about any of the other Bonds. Like, Connery is my least favorite element in a couple of his. Moore, my least favorite element in most of his, and Lazenby is just like, for his
pretty
one
clearly
movie,
the weakest part of his.
he is like, it's an interesting Bond. He's not great in the role, and part of that is because they, for whatever reason, dub him for a third of the movie when he's playing this other version of the character in the Alps or whatever. Like, it's so there's a lot of like, but he wasn't nearly as bad as I thought he was going to be, based on a lifetime of hearing George Lazenby as the Bond that gets swept under the rug kind of stuff. But Daniel Craig ends up taking the top of my list.
Yeah, I'm not unsurprised, right? My list is different, but I think one of the fun things about doing this podcast...
I'll just say, I put Lazenby above Moore. I hated Roger Moore so much by the end that I'm like, no, even Lazenby's one movie is way better than ever having to sit through half of Moore's run ever again.
I think that, for me, part of the fun of doing this series has been how expectations can inform viewings of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think expectations and kind of the pop culture impact of the series has informed, for understandable reasons, so many of your viewings of these characters or these actors or these films. And it's been really interesting to watch versus someone who just kind of like was born with this, literally has no memory of not these things in my life. And so like that's there's some sort of like psychological experiment underway here on like the effect of these things. And so that's been like one of the things that I've most enjoyed about this, is seeing how that's kind of played into our rankings. Sean Connery is James Bond to me, right? That I don't know if that feasibly can really change at this point in time in my life. Right? I mean, those are just the movies that my dad watched growing up. Those are the movies that I then watched growing up while watching them with my dad. And I do just genuinely just love Sean Connery's interpretation of the character. Like I think him and Goldfinger is just like the most James Bond the character has ever been. And so like he is my favorite Bond, right? I still think Sean Connery is James Bond for me. And then after that, like it's interesting for me because I would probably say Pierce Brosnan is my second favorite James Bond, which isn't like a huge stretch from like where he's at your list, is just one spot higher. But I really like Pierce's Bond because I think it is sort of a melding of like the two interpretations of how you play James Bond, right? Like I think in one bucket you typically have like the more gruff, brooding, serious, brawly Bond, right? And the buckets of like Connery and Dalton and Craig. And then in the other bucket you have kind of the more like fun, quippy Bonds of like, Roger Moore in particular, almost mostly, but then also like Diamonds Are Forever, Sean Connery kind of thing, right? And Lazenby to an extent. And I think Pierce Brosnan is like the one Bond who really can kind of bring those two things together. And, some people who are critics of Pierce's run as Bond, kind of call him like the pretty boy Bond, and he's like the most beautiful Bond of all. But like, here's the thing: he's great. He's great to look at. Pierce Brosnan is still a beautiful man, and he's like 70 years old now. And I think we were really lucky to have Pierce Brosnan be our James Bond. And I think this series was really lucky to have Pierce Brosnan be James Bond. Like, I think there is this weird, and like part of me maybe is just like annoyed by like the reaction on Pierce Brosnan where like people are kind of like down on him. And it's like, I genuinely think that like if we had had a different actor be James Bond in the 90s, we might not have James Bond movies right now, right? Like, I do think people forget just how like serious GoldenEye being good was, right? Like, the movie series had gone 6.5 years without a film, which is its longest time ever. The last movie that had come out before that was basically the biggest box office bomb since On Her Majesty's Secret Service in the series, right? With, License to Kill. Despite it being a great movie, it was just ahead of its time. It was very dark, very brutal, and it just did not.
It's especially like it is, as we touched on many times here. It's an 80s action movie, which is not what typically the UK was known for. Yeah. Like, they were not the pioneers of that. That is America. That is Die Hard. That is Lethal Weapon. That is like Rambo. All of that stuff. It's very much like outside of its niche in a very interesting way that like is fun to watch now and look back on, but like, yeah, at the time it was very much, this is not what I imagine audiences wanted out of Bond at all.
Yeah. And so, coming off the heels of that disappointment and, even Living Daylights was definitely much better received at the box office, but still like, oh, okay, this is like, we're figuring out what this is. And then the very next one is essentially a bomb that has led to Bond not being released in the summer for 30 plus years now. Going into GoldenEye, it was very much like, all right, like, we can't have another misstep here. And I think Pierce Brosnan came out and delivered. I mean, on each of our lists, it is our fourth favorite Bond movie. I think each of us would agree it's one of the best James Bond performances by an actor, right? Like, I think Pierce is easily at like the top of his game in that movie. And despite what people might think of the other three films that followed it, it was the Pierce Brosnan era that started the trend of basically every movie that follows is going to break the box office record for the best grossing Bond movie, which the series would have all the way until Skyfall became the first one to hit $1 billion worldwide, right? Like, the box office credentials of James Bond were very much firmly established under Pierce Brosnan. Making him culturally relevant again felt like it happened under Pierce Brosnan. The proliferation of like the games, the proliferation of like just Bond as a thing happened under Pierce Brosnan. So I really like Pierce Brosnan. I think he's a hell of a lot of fun. He'd be my second favorite Bond. And then after that, yeah, Daniel Craig would be third for me. Daniel Craig is great. One of the surprises I could argue in my review is just how much I enjoy Daniel Craig, which isn't really a surprise. I knew I liked Daniel Craig, but I think it is easy to talk about the issues why I don't like Daniel Craig as James Bond sometimes, and kind of get lost in the fact that like he, I think, is a just like really well-talented actor, and gave at the very least 2.5 of my favorite Bond performances. Honestly, even 3, because I like him a lot in No Time to Die. It's not the issues I have with that movie are not him. And so, like, I think, he's got 2 movies and 2 performances that I think are among my favorite ever. And I think he's got a really beautiful kind of finale in No Time to Die. And even when the movies aren't good, I don't think he's mostly the issue. And so then after that, yeah, Timothy Dalton's pretty clearly 4. And I really think the top 4 is a pretty easy top 4 to pick out for me. I would ultimately, and this might be a little bit of like Any Given Sunday, but like I ultimately would probably pick Roger Moore just ahead of George Lazenby, because at least Roger Moore gives me Live and Let Die and Spy Who Loved Me. Even if he gives me all the bad movies, I do dislike George Lazenby more than you. And part of that is I think like you were ready for him to be awful, and he's not, but I do think he's pretty bad. And as I've routinely said, I have On Her Majesty's Secret Service pretty mid-tier,
Yeah,
right?
you have
Like
it number 14.
thank you, perfect.
I have it one below. I have it number 15.
Right. So yeah, pretty
We're
mid-tier.
both there.
But I think if that movie had almost literally any of the other actors in it, with, again, maybe the exception of Raj Moore, I think that movie would have been a few spots higher. But I think that George Lazenby is someone who was in sort of an impossible situation, to be fair to him, right? Like, I do try to, like, preface the fact that, like, even in the midst of all the fact that he, like, yeah, he wasn't an actor, and he did, you know, he basically bushwhacked Brockton to get in the role by just, like, camping out at his barber office until he got, like, a audition. Despite all of that, like...
I mean, sure, but it's also Broccoli being the dumbass who actually cast him.
Gave him the role.
Yeah.
And, like, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, none of this is really his fault. It was his first film role, and he gave, I think, what is a performance in your first film role. Like, it's rough, and it's uneven, and his character is super bizarre. And
yeah.
It's the fact that he's dubbed for a third of it. It's like a lot of weird decisions that didn't give him anything to work with.
I mean, even structurally, it is very much like the end of a Bond's story, not the beginning of a Bond's story.
Yes. And
which we see very directly, obviously, from No Time to Die and all of the callbacks that it makes to that movie.
So it's unfortunate that Connery couldn't come back, because this is a much more natural ending point for him than Diamonds Are Forever. And because I think Connery would have been really good. And I think this could have been a story that would have gotten Connery motivated and excited to be James Bond again. I understand, obviously, why he didn't, because he was just exhausted. But that's all unfortunate. And then the fact that, like, probably the biggest reason of all is that, like, I think sort of no matter what George Lazenby did, a little bit like Raiden Ehrenreich in Solo, he couldn't win. He was just never going to be the same thing because of what Sean Connery had done to get in that character started. A little bit like, I do think, to be fair to Shia LaBeouf in Crystal Skull, I think Shia LaBeouf is actually fine. Like, I don't think he's great, but I think he's, like, totally fine in that movie. I just think that people are very much like, oh, they're trying to make this a backdoor pilot to make him be the next Indiana Jones. We don't like that, which is fair, which is totally fair. But he's actually not terrible in the movie. He's just not Harrison Ford. And I think,
again, like, he is not the worst part of that movie. The worst part of that movie 100%. Is like the writing, the directing, the CGI. Right. Like, there are a laundry list of worse things.
100%. Same with On Ehrenreich and Solo. Like, I don't like Solo significantly more than you do, but I definitely don't think he is the reason why that movie has its many issues for me, right? And I think George Lazenby is bad. I think he is a lot of the issue with this movie, but I think he was put into basically an impossible situation, and then when people didn't like that, you know, the Broccoli Saltzman duo did not offer him a lot of support afterwards, and whether or not it was because he was like a hippie or not is sort of irrelevant. They put him in a situation he couldn't win in, and then he didn't win, and then they just sort of slowly pushed him away. And that's unfair. It's unfair that he is also forgotten because of the fact that he is between one actor who created the role, is its most iconic performer, and did 6 movies, and another guy who did it for the most movies for the then longest time in 7 films. And in between those 2 runs is one actor who is not good, but is not as bad as people make him out to be, even if he is my least favorite James Bond. That's what I would say. Be nice to George Lazenby. The dude is, regretting the decision for 40 years now. It's fine. Let him just have some peace. He did do he's done some real fun Bond parodies over the years, so he at least had some fun with the character. Trevor, where do you want the series to go from here? What are your thoughts in the future as we hit near the 2-hour mark on this last episode? Hit me with it.
I mean, we've talked about this every now and then, and obviously, like, you know, I especially as I'm rewatching The Wire right now. Ooh. If you went back and cast Idris Elba 15 years ago, he'd be a great Bond. I think now he's probably too old for it. And I think I think the problem is right now, a lot of the actors that are like established and are names that I would know from like the UK acting scene, probably too old for it.
Tom Hardy.
Tom Hardy.
There's one you hear a lot. Cillian Murphy's one you hear a lot.
Sure. Obviously we've talked a lot about the idea of like a John Boyega would be an interesting one. Henry Golding, I know is I see thrown
in
around.
Bellevue.
Like one of the ones I go to immediately is like Tom Hiddleston. I think could be a lot of fun in that role.
How old is Tom Hiddleston?
41. I just looked it up.
Thank you. Okay.
So like he's probably too old for it.
He's right on that line.
To be a version of this, and he's also depending on how tied up he is with the MCU, probably going to be tough to be in like multiple franchises. Same reason that like one of the reasons I don't think they would ever go with like a Tom Holland. Although I think like box office wise, I think Tom Holland is like the most bankable option they probably have. But
I will say to the Tom Hiddleston thing, I will say this. The ages of the James Bond actors in their first movies are 32, 30, 45, 41, 42, 38. So 41's not too old.
I mean, that's if the movie came out now, though, is the thing. Like, and I imagine that one's still at least a couple years away. But like he's definitely just. I think he is one of those actors. Tom Hiddleston in particular I think he could capture a lot of the Pierce Brosnan charm to it. He's such a lovable, likable performer who can be intense and menacing if he needs to be, but he can also just be oozing with charm and kind of play with all that.
Seen The Hotel Manager for Tom Hiddleston? It's sort of like an espionage thriller, and it came out. I just checked. It came out in 2016, where he would have been in his 30s, and he is so good in that. And it is such a great like sliding doors moment of like, man, if they had just let Daniel Craig end Inspector and cast Hiddleston like right after that, like in 2017, 2018 time period, he'd been like perfect.
Mm-hmm. Another one I will go with, because I think of this cast of characters, I think he's the most likely one who could kind of break out and do it. It'd be a super long shot, and it's also admittedly not. I hope they go with like a more diverse kind of casting choice. Mm-hmm. I think there's much more interesting avenues to be played if they go that route, much like they're doing with Doctor Who and stuff in recent years. But if they don't, and they kind of like keep it, the what you would expect a James Bond character to be, I think Tom Felton could potentially be some fun in the role. The former Draco Malfoy.
That's a really fun pick.
And he's in there at the ripe old age of 34 right
30,
now.
Yeah, he's only a little bit older than me, yeah. That's a great shout out, Trey. I really like that. That's a really like out to the box one. He'd be such an interesting he almost reminds me of like what like a snarky Dalton would be. Like he's got that kind of vibe to it, which I'd be very down for that. That's a great pick that I haven't heard of, and I've heard a lot of James Bond room picks. That's a great one. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, for me, obviously, I'll beat a dead horse in this until the day they finally announce the new James Bond and break my heart. My dream pick would be Dev Patel. I think he is like so perfect for the role. I think he's got the look. He can just wear a suit so well. Which, if I have any critique of Timothy Dalton, I think that at times those suits kind of engulfed him. It's also partly the era, to be fair, but he very much does not look great in the suits as opposed to some of the other Bonds.
I was gonna say, like, also like his hair wasn't great for those movies. Like, I think a modern stylist could do a lot better with him. Than those films did. Those films did him a little dirty because that wasn't what they were paying attention to.
Yeah, but like Dev Patel, I think he's got the looks. I think very much can deliver like the acting chops. He very much can deliver like the kind of humor I want. Is kind of beat into like what else I want from like the next generation of Bond is like a new direction. I want it to kind of, I don't need it to be campy, but I want this kind of balance between like dramatic moments and humor, a little bit akin to the Pierce Brosnan era. And maybe like GoldenEye, which I think threads that needle really, really well, which I do not think GoldenEye is like a goofy, silly movie at all. But it's got moments of levity in it and humor. And that's kind of what I want from the Bond series. I want that to kind of like shift a little bit away from the kind of ultra seriousness of most of Craig's stuff back to stuff that is just like a bit lighter Sunday afternoon fare you can just kind of enjoy and sink into, and then maybe build up to something kind of more serious and dark. And I think Death Patel would be great in that. If we can't get, and also just I think, plethora of stories you can tell with someone of Indian descent being James Bond, and what that does in terms of like its relationship with like British imperialism and the British Empire, which obviously we've seen the Daniel Craig era kind of explore and do stuff with. And I think you can have so much fun with that. I would love if they can't do Dev Patel, but you really can. He's great. John Boyega is another one I think is just great, and I would love to see him be given the opportunity to be the flagship character of a series and just be given the trust in that, right? And not sort of slowly over time be done dirty, which I think kind of unfortunately happened with Star Wars. I think Henry Golden, which is obviously former That Internet Site editor Ben Bellevue's, it's kind of his pick for years now. He's shouted about Henry Golden doing it. I think that would be great. I think Tom Hiddleston was a great shout out by you. I really like that. I think, if keeping it with Harry Potter seemed actors, I think that he would never do it, but like Daniel Radcliffe would be a super interesting one as well, just because of like, I would love to see his like shorter. I think he'd be perfect as like a Pierce Brosnan kind of like quippy, flippant Bond. Rupert Grint is also really great. I've seen him in some more like serious stuff recently, and like I actually really enjoy him as like a more serious actor.
Or how fun would it be if it was like Daniel Craig as Bond, Rupert Grint as Q, and Emma Watson as M?
That'd be great. That's the thing. Like, and so like I think there's so much like opportunity for there. I agree that I don't think it's gonna be Idris Elba, right? Like, just for like time's sake alone. Well, like I do think it could be interesting for like any of these actors in their like second half of the 40s or 50s to like basically be told, we're going to sign you to a 3-film deal and basically like crank these out and just kind of get like an older Bond story. I don't think that's the direction they're going to want to go, because I think one of the ramifications of the MCUification of films is we're going to lock you down to a 10-year deal. You're going to make us some movies kind of thing. I checked again, the bookie's favorite for like over a year now has been Henry Cavill, who is 39, and who obviously kind of famously was the runner-up to Daniel Craig. I don't think Henry Cavill will ultimately be the next James Bond. Having said that, I am not opposed to the idea of Henry Cavill being the next James Bond. I think we can do something more interesting and exciting than that, for sure. I am much of the opinion that like I really do want it to be a person of color. I think there are just so many more interesting storytelling avenues for that kind of, character arc. Especially because I think after these 6 Bonds we've had, we've gotten the image of like a white James Bond actor kind of in like the last embers of the British Empire with like the Connery stuff. And we've got it at the other end of the spectrum with like at the end of the kind of the last dust of like dust falling from the British Empire in the Daniel Craig era, and everything in between. We've got a white British James Bond story done pretty well. We can do something different. And so whether it's Henry Cavill, unfortunately not doing it or not. Having said that, Henry Cavill at least is someone who I think would be a great ambassador for James Bond. And that is one of the things that is actually important to me, is that I do just want someone to enjoy being James Bond, right? Mm-hmm. And this is, again, a critique I've had of Daniel Craig for years, is that part of made Daniel Craig great as James Bond is that he was not a fan. He had not watched these movies kind of as a kid growing up, really. And it allowed him to have this kind of like, there are no sacred cows approach to the character, which led to great films like Casino Royale and Skyfall. I think it also led to other instances of stuff that I didn't like as much. And I think his approach with the character very quickly kind of ran thin. And I think Pierce Brosnan was someone who just always seemed to just love being James Bond. And that's sort of what I would want from the next James Bond, someone who just is excited to do it. And I think Henry Cavill is someone who, whether it's as The Witcher, whether it's as Superman, whether it's pretty much anything I've ever seen him do or talk about, just seems to have this genuine passion for so much of life. And I think he'd be a lot of fun as just someone to kind of get the next generation of kids excited about James Bond and about the series and about the actor.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say.
3 more names to throw out for Bond. I don't know if we're gonna also do like who should be M and who should be any of these other roles.
We don't do that.
But 3 more names in kind of order of interest for me. Number
Mm-hmm.
3, just because he's phenomenal in everything he does, and I would love to I would love to see him, his take on this character, Andrew Garfield. As
Ooh.
because
He would
he's
never do it, but yeah, that's a really interesting pick.
yeah.
It's a really great shout out.
Number 2, kind of in the same vein with a lot of your Dev Patel points, I think Riz Ahmed
Ooh, yeah. Yep.
could
He's
as a
seen
Pakistani
occasionally
actor
by like a
himself,
bookie's
I think could tell
pick
a
as
lot of
well.
the same kind of like struggles and
Yeah.
imperialism kind of like pushback. And then lastly, Daniel Kaluuya.
Ooh,
I think
yeah.
he definitely easily has the chops to him, and he is of those 3, he's the youngest of the bunch, so he could
just check. Yeah,
he could be the most locked in. I think he's like 33.
He looks great in a suit too. He's a beautiful man. Yeah, that's a great. I know that David Oello is one that people will talk about every now and again as well. He's a bit older now. I think he's close to, if not 40. That's a great shout out at the end. Yeah, I like all 3 of those suggestions. Andrew Garfield is one who I think he's just got this like almost like elasticness to him. Like he's a very thin, long person, and I think I'd be super interested to see like the physicality of him in a Bond role.
Or if anything, maybe I'd like to see him as a villain, like as a 006 Alec Trevelyan-esque. Like he was a 00 agent, but he's turned bad, and we get to see him just in a fun like bad role.
You know who I think Andrew Garfield would be good at as well? Would be Q.
Yeah, he'd be a solid Q.
I think he'd be a great Q as well. I mean, again, one who I think would have been a great Bond, but now it won't happen, would have like
gone back to like Ben Whishaw, yeah.
Yeah, it would have been like back in like 2009 and 10 when The Hour came out, which is one of my favorite series still to this day, and he's phenomenal in it. I think Ben Whishaw would have been a great James Bond, and we lucked out in that we got him in the series at all, and he's I think, really great Q, but yeah, I think he would have been a really, really good Bond. I think he totally has the chops for it, and just like plays that character so well. I think he also, like, there's an element of like subverting the usual expectation of what a James Bond actor should look like in Ben Whishaw as well, and even Andrew Garfield to an extent that I also really like. They're just not the typical like this is what Bond looks like kind of guys, especially in the wake of like Daniel Craig, who is just like a military man kind of thing, and so I also like that idea as well.
Last casting one. I think if they carry anything over from this era, I would like to see them carry over Paloma, Ana de Armas's character as the new Felix Leiter. Like in the same way that they carried over Judi Dench, just keep giving Ana de Armas fun little action scenes, let her pop up, be Bond's ally for a sequence or two, and then bounce.
Mm-hmm. That is one of the things that I will say to kind of bring this to a close as well, is that like I firmly expect them to recast everyone. With the way that Daniel Craig era ends, I'd be shocked if it doesn't make any sense for anyone. It's just a way to confuse audiences. They're not going to do it. And it's also, I think, a good natural ending point for those characters as well. Ben Whishaw has pretty much made clear that he's not going to come back for another one. And the other one that I would be excited to see again, actually, that's a great shout out, Trevor. But the one that like people mention every now and again as like, ooh, that'd be a cool idea, is for Naomi Harris to come back as M. I'd be all over it. Would love that idea. Yeah. I think she'd be so great as like a younger M, who would probably only be like a few years older than whoever they had essentially be the next James Bond. And she absolutely has the ability to kind of do a Judi Dench style M. And yeah, I think she'd be great at it. Also, just give me more Naomi Harris. It's also just kind of selfishly wanting that.
Fulfill that long rumored Lois Maxwell.
Lois Maxwell.
Yeah.
Lois Maxwell would have been. Lois Maxwell easily could have done what Robert Brown did in his movies. Yeah, it'd have been such a cool idea. And again, we never got it because of Cubby Broccoli, but it'd been such a cool idea. Luckily, it kind of came to fruition with Judi Dench a few years later. But yeah, it's a great idea.
Who? Like obviously running through a lot of Bonds. I'm curious, who out there would you like to see? Who do you think could really get a meaty villain role out of?
It's interesting. I think that one element of this is I think it'd be kind of fun to do like an American villain, because we haven't had actually that many like American Bond villains for semi obvious reasons. And so like I think that like Josh Brolin, right, could do like a really great kind of like more sinister, or not. Josh Brolin's also just kind of like a little nuts and crazy fun, and so like he could also do something like more campy too in the Christopher Walken vein. But like he also could do like a very sinister Bond villain in a way that I would really like, and I think would be engaging. I think that like I'm trying to think like I mean Benedict Cumberbatch, I'm sure he could be a great Bond villain. Like I think he'd have a lot of fun with that role as well. I think it'd be kind of interesting to like one of the ones that like I think I actually would rather see more than him be James Bond is I would like to see Idris Elba be a Bond villain, in the vein almost of that's who I would want to be 006. That's who I'd want to be like the former Bond agent, a little bit like either Silva or Trevelyan, like him, having been like the golden child kind of thing, or even like Bond's mentor, something in that vein, right? Or like Bond's old friend, something in that kind of category, like who you knew Bond, unlike Silva, and is now the main villain. Like I think Idris Elba could do great as like that kind of character, and it'd be a way to kind of give fans something they've thought about for fucking 15 years, while not having it be like impossible because of his age kind of thing. Like I think Idris Elba would be a great Bond villain as well.
I'd like to see this is the one that came to my mind. I'd like to see an Electra King style villain with Keira Knightley.
Ooh, Keira Knightley, shut up. Yeah, she could definitely do something in that vein. That'd be great.
Yep.
Yeah, Keira Knightley could be really good. Yeah, I like that idea. I like that suggestion a lot. I like that suggestion a lot. Trevor, any final thoughts on the future of James Bond before we bring a close to the show?
I don't think so. I hope, and obviously I think we will, much like, the Daniel Craig era started with kind of the bornification of the James Bond series, and by the end, it definitely had kind of its maybe Fast and Furious and MCU-esque moments. I think we'll continue to see kind of the evolution of action and the raid moments that we talked about like a lot in the No Time to Die and the that stairwell sequence. So I think like whatever they end up doing with it, I think it'll be kind of an interesting. I think like a huge element of this that's fascinating is what the series kind of like looked at and touched on in the last couple Craig movies, in that like so much of what we look at nowadays is cyber terrorism and what does it look like to have boots on the ground and have like a person in a suit doing espionage, something like that. I'd like to see a Bond that is a spy and not just flaunting around who he is everywhere. But yeah, whoever it is, I'll we'll give it a shot, and hope for the best in this new thing.
Yeah, I'm excited to see in that vein as well, kind of them continue to explore those themes they've established in the Craig era.
I honestly, I kind of think we talked about this at some point too. Like, I think it would be very interesting if they almost to create like a buffer before the next like permanent Bond, if they were to just kind of, hey, we're going to tell this we've got a very interesting one-off story, we're going to bring in an Idris Elba or somebody who we don't have to like tie into a long contract or something. Like, we're just going to tell a one and done, because we recognize that like there's always going to be this very weird thing of, oh, they're not Daniel Craig. So let's just kind of lean into it and be like, they're not Daniel Craig. And until we come up with like a new arc for this character, here's just a standalone Bond.
Right. I like that idea. I like that idea. I think that'd be, and then I think Idris Elba would fit into that nicely. I think, yeah, if you wanted Tom Hardy, he would fit. I think Tom Hardy is. I know it's a really popular pick for people. I think it's a really off pick for Bond in a lot of ways. He almost strikes me as better as like a Bond villain than James Bond. But
yeah, do Christopher Nolan's 007 and it's Tom Hardy as a Bond, and for some reason he's wearing a gas mask for half the movie.
Right. Yeah, I think.
And then Cillian Murphy as his villain.
Yeah, Christian Bale makes an appearance.
Yep.
I think that
Christian Bale is M. And then Jonathan Gordon-Levitt is Q.
Yeah, I like. Ooh, he actually would be.
Marion Cotillard is your
in it.
femme fatale.
Yeah, she actually would be a good. She should be in a Bond movie. She'd be a good femme fatale.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where the next generation of Bond goes. Whether it's one off to kind of give some time. My big thing is that like I just don't want them to go too long in between the next movie, right? Like I think 2 or 3 years is totally fine. Start kind of getting the buzz building like in the back half of this year. It is the 60th anniversary of James Bond, which is part of kind of the fun of doing the series this year. I'd like to see some sort of announcement, something around the movie, whether it's just like we have a name or we've got, a director or whatever. Obviously, ideally, we'd have a star this year. I don't know if we're there because Barbara Brock keeps talking about how we need to give time to kind of reflect on how great Daniel Craig was. All right. But yeah, I think a one-off kind of interstitial would be a really cool idea. Or obviously Amazon is buying Ion, and MGM, so maybe we'll get like some sort of like limited edition series of Ana de Armas just doing cool shit to kind of hold us over, which I also would be okay with. Yeah, who knows? Or even it could be even fun to get like an interstitial stint of like Natasha Lynch's like 007 run, like
Lashana Lynch,
yeah, like pre Daniel Craig come back. Like that could be an opportunity to kind of be like a limited series on Amazon. But obviously that is a bit more closer to like I think confusing people of like what timeline are we doing and is this canonical kind of thing. So that's all stuff to consider. But that's it. That is that Bond show. Thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, you can go over to youtube.com/thatnerdsite, where you should already be for this YouTube exclusive series. Hit the like button, leave a little comment, tell us what your thoughts on James Bond's future are, what your Bond ranking movies are, all 25 of them, list them in the comments. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell to get notified when a new video goes live Monday through Saturday over at thatnerdysite.com.
I don't know if we're going to have Saturday videos going live after this.
That's true, but for right now we do. As of this going live, at least one more. So ring the bell notification to get notified when new video goes live every single day over there. And you can also go over to That Nerdy Site to check out all of the great content we have there, reviews, features, podcasts, everything, as well as, of course, the written review companion pieces to the show. After this goes live, before this goes live, sometime kind of in between those two, I'll be having pieces on my personal favorite villains, as well as ranking all of the movies again, and kind of my thing. Be excited for those. And then otherwise, you can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything that you want to plug or shout out?
I will plug and shout out That D Plus show. If you've liked that Bond show where we dive deep into, all these Bond movies and have fun little trivia facts and stuff like that, That D Plus show probably, a good up your alley kind of podcast where each and every week we dive into an offering over there on Disney Plus, and maybe we'll branch out into other forums to do just other kind of, shorter form film things like Logan alluded to or joked earlier. Maybe we'll do an Indiana Jones in review kind of type style thing one day. I mean, theoretically, at some point that'll probably go to Disney Plus, right? Because
they keep saying
it's all under that umbrella now. So, go check out That D Plus show every Friday over on YouTube or on podcast services.
You can go find me at LeftyLogie, at LeftyLoggy, Loggy. That was also going to be my shout out. So I'm also going to give a shout out to the Let's Plays that go live every Tuesday and Thursday by Trevor, and every Friday for Friday Night Dying Light by Cameron. You go check out those out. They do great work. They put those out every week. We have 3 days a week worth of Let's Plays. So yeah, I encourage everyone to go check all of that out. And finally, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet. Finally, I just wanted to say thank you for watching and listening to the past 26 weeks, 6 months worth of James Bond content we've done, with a few things left to come after this. Again, those rankings. For 6 months, we've done this silly show about James Bond because it's something I've loved and enjoyed since some of my very earliest memories. I've wanted to do this show for literally years and years and years. I wanted to do a show like this, just kind of going back over and rewatching all the James Bond movies. And I've really enjoyed getting to share the love, silliness, and weaknesses of James Bond that I have for the series alongside all of you. That's part of what makes all of this fun. Ranting and debating and getting into the good and bad of everything we love here at That Nerdy Site. And James Bond unquestionably is one of those things for me. So again, thank you. It's been a joy to share this with all of you, and especially to share it with you, Trevor, for the past 6 months, including one in-person viewing of a Bond movie. So thank you all. Thank you, Trevor. And until next time, thank you all for watching, and that Bond show will return.